Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show we're talking the 1950 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Judy Holliday won for her performance in Born Yesterday. But why did she beat fellow nominees Anne Baxter, Bette Davis, Eleanor Parker, and Gloria Swanson? We'll explore all this and more today on the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 23rd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1950. We'll be discussing why Judy Holliday won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this iconic Best Actress race. And my guest today, I feel in some ways is a perfect guest for this particular year because I know he'll bring the takes to this very contested race. You've heard him so many times on this show that I have lost count. But listeners might remember him for being my guest on the Best Picture series for the very first Academy Awards. Founder of AwardsWatch. Some would say he's the greatest star of them all. The man who can always put awards where his heart ought to be. Please welcome back to the show, Erik Anderson.
Kevin, that was the greatest introduction and one of my favorite lines from one of the movies we'll be talking about today. That was glorious. Yes. I hope I can live up to it.
I think you will. Don't sell yourself
I'll have to put my best mid-Atlantic accent on at some point. I don't know.
I would like to hear it.
So would I.
That is a promise for the listeners. All right, so let's get into it. But actually, before we talk 1950, we have a very important question we have to ask you, which is Best Actress as a category. So genuinely curious about this one for you, because I don't know if I know this personally, but what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
This is so hard, and you know how long I can ramble if I start rambling, so I will try not to. There's so many that I love, and for so many reasons. I love Halle Berry's win for its importance, and I love her performance. I will always love that performance. I love Julianne Moore's win for her performance, and because it finally happened. I love that win, unapologetically. When I dig a little deeper into just my favorites, I probably land on two more than any, and it's Jane Fonda in Clute. I just think it's such a revolutionary performance, especially for the time. I'm just obsessed with her anyway. But also Shirley Booth. And
Yes.
I think it might actually be my all-time favorite.
You and Andrew Carden share that opinion.
I am such a fan of performances from actresses in early work or first work, stage work, that going from stage to silver screen.
More on that later.
Yes, I'm such a fan of the embracing of that. But at this time, that was pretty much not all there was, but it was really, really, really common. But I think Shirley Booth just hits every single possible right note for the time. Melodramatic, but not so much so that it feels like you can sort of tease or mock it a little bit of the time. It is a gut-wrenching performance.
I love that answer. We'll be covering Shirley Booth very, very soon, actually in 2 weeks, 1952. So that's an excellent tease. Yes, I also happen to love that performance. Very tricky, very delicate. It reminds me of what someone like Brenda Blethyn would do in Secrets and Lies, or Vera Drake, Imelda Staunton.
Yes.
Just these very fragile kinds of performances from more mature actresses that really just knock your socks off. So great answer. Obviously, I've talked about Jane Fonda and Clute many times. Totally agree with that as well. I love that you gave me basically like your own nominees for your favorite win. I would expect nothing less. But on the flip side, we love our winners, but we also love our losers. So, Eric, what is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
I have two, and one of them I promise you is not just a curry favor with you, Kevin.
Oh boy.
But Judy Garland in A Star Is Born, a perfect performance and should have won. Sorry, Grace Kelly. Not sorry.
Not sorry.
But Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons, even more so, because I think kind of for each of them, if there was ever a perfect and better time for it to happen, it was then. Mm-hmm. And I will never really kind of fully be over that for her, because I think it was her best nomination and her best shot.
Probably true. Yes. And I will agree that she had 5 nominations at that point, and that felt like the exact right time. But there are dreams that cannot be. Well, on that note, speaking of heartbreaking losses, I suppose, let's just jump right into this very, again, hotly contested year where everyone has their own opinion on who deserved to win. And some people think the winner deserved to win. Everyone has their own opinion. I've heard people defend all 5 of these performances. So let's jump right in. So, 23rd Academy Awards, the nominees were Anne Baxter for All About Eve, Bette Davis for All About Eve, Judy Holliday for Born Yesterday, Eleanor Parker for Caged, and Gloria Swanson for Sunset Boulevard, with the winner being Judy Holliday. So, before we break down these performances individually, would love to know your thoughts just on this overall lineup.
This is one of those all-timer lineups where there isn't anyone that is giving lesser or even in a lesser film. And I know sometimes like Caged and Eleanor Parker get saddled with that. And we'll talk about her specifically and maybe why. But I disagree. It's a great performance as much as the rest are. I think what's kind of exceptional about this is you had 2 stories that are diving into, and in different ways, how women in Hollywood were regarded at a certain age. And these are not like old women. They were not by any real estimation old. Right. But I think the fascinating thing is that we sort of look at how Hollywood treats any woman over 30 as a relatively new thing. I sort of feel like people feel like it's a new thing. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely not.
Tale as old as time. Yeah.
And I think what they were doing in 1950 with both All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard was pretty fantastic for the time.
Yeah. I think this is pound for pound one of the best lineups that the Oscars ever produced, I would say, in this category, at least. I honestly think if these performances weren't in competition with each other, that if this was a weaker year, that pretty much any of them could have won. You know, it's just one of those lineups where it gives you a little something of everything. Like we have these exciting newcomers like a Judy Holliday, of course, and Eleanor Parker, who isn't exactly new, but certainly is breaking out at the time. And you have, Anne Baxter really cementing herself after winning a supporting Oscar, now being a leading lady star. And then you have these 2 legends of Bette Davis, who's really entering a new phase in her career, I would say. And then this huge comeback of all comebacks with Gloria Swanson, who was maybe thought to have already peaked, but is totally just soaring to these new heights here. So it's just, it's one of those rare Oscar moments where it's like past, present, future all kind of colliding here. Mm-hmm. And, I hope we do it justice.
I hope so too.
Are we ready?
We're ready. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, let's start off big here. Actually, you know what? I think a good way of doing this is to combine them so we don't have to be too rigid with our discussion. Anne Baxter and Bette Davis in All About Eve.
Okay.
So, starting with Anne Baxter, she's someone who we haven't talked about yet on the show, but she is already an Oscar winner. Like I said, by this point, she won for The Razor's Edge a few years before this. But to tie it back to this show, she originally came to Hollywood to screen test for Rebecca, but she was thought to be too young for the role. But she was signed onto a contract anyway. She was in things like Magnificent Ambersons, but then, The Razor's Edge is what really gave her this big boost. She did supporting roles, lead roles. She was very versatile, I would say. But then she gets, obviously, this big, juicy part as Eve here. Apparently it was going to be Jean Crane, which I don't think would have been very good. But I'm not a huge fan of Jean Crane, as we established in 1949 with Pinky. Yikes. But yeah, so Anne Baxter obviously takes this part, her only lead nomination, so last time she'd be nominated at the Oscars. And then on the flip side, we have this big comeback for Bette Davis. I mean, like, all throughout the 30s and 40s, I've been talking about her. But her last nomination was actually in 1944 with Mr. Skeffington. So it had been 6 years. Also not a great performance, in my opinion. But in a way, this feels like a comeback for her. Even though it's only been 6 years, it's like, here we go. This is the Bette Davis we know and love, sort of thing. So I know that there was also a few other names in the mix for this part as well, like Marlene Dietrich, Barbara Stanwyck. Apparently Claudette Colbert was chosen, actually, but she got injured, so she had to drop out. And here comes Betty. She said it was the best script she ever read, and apparently it was a very harmonious set from what I've read, despite what people may have thought going into it. And just, despite the film itself, you would feel like lots of egos involved, but apparently she got a lot of great relationships out of it. So that's fun.
Except for maybe Celeste Holm, but I don't know. There's maybe or maybe not.
Sure. Vast majority, good relationships.
Yes.
So Anne Baxter plays Eve. Bette Davis plays Margot. And for those who don't know, first of all, please watch All About Eve before we even jump into this. I hope that you would have watched it by now, but if not, I'll just give you a quick summary. Margot is this celebrated Broadway star. She's approaching 40. Oh no. So there's some anxiousness there with just how show business treats women as they get older. And in comes Eve, who is like her biggest fan. She's this young woman who goes backstage to Margot's dressing room, and she's able to kind of worm her way into her life, essentially taking over her life as an assistant. But it becomes very clear that Eve has some other ambitions to her. So yeah, very, very juicy stuff. Let's just talk about it. What are your thoughts on Anne Baxter and Bette Davis? Maybe first talking about them as actresses, but then, of course, their performances here.
Anne Baxter is such a interesting case because, yeah, she had this supporting actress Oscar win just a few years before, and that got her here to All About Eve. But after that, she had 10 Commandments, but it didn't even take like a decade for her to be kind of shunned from film and pretty much only star in television for the rest of her acting life, which I always thought was a little strange, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't have any authority or knowledge really as to why, but I do always find it kind of fascinating when an actor of any era is at sort of like a high point, and you think that audiences and Hollywood are going to both kind of converge at the same time, and their stardom will just explode. But sometimes it just doesn't work out that way, and that was definitely the case for her. I love her in this. I mean, this is like a top 5 all-time movie for me. So it's absurdly good. One of the best scripts of all time. And I do think it's really interesting how Baxter is not really afraid to play Eve as pretty visibly unhinged.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to everybody else, she's kind of really doing something different than everyone else is. And as an audience member, you're sort of looking and going, can you guys not see what she's doing? This is
you
a
want to be
little
the
weird.
Thelma Ritter of the group, right?
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
Thelma Ritter's always right all the time.
She is.
So, I mean, if she's in a movie, just follow her because she has all the tea and she's right all the time. And that's, again, I mean, one of the smart things about the movie is even just including Birdie as a character, because you have to have, but it's great to have an audience cipher in some way when you are telling a story that is pretty removed from what an average person's life is, as well as so that you can have bits of information that other characters don't have, and you're just kind of building toward things at the end. But I do love what Anne Baxter does. I love her voice. I obviously rewatched everything again this week. And this I just watched yesterday again. And her voice kept reminding me of Kathleen Turner, like a slightly less gravelly Kathleen Turner, where
Yes.
it was deep and not forceful, but so assertive and confident that that's how she gets her way into the door. And everything that she does in the film is that she has to sort of speak out of both sides of her mouth with that confidence and with sincerity, but at the same time with an acid tongue when it needs to happen, which is a lot less than like Bette Davis does. They do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Bette Davis is acid tongued and unfiltered 90% of the time. And you get these little moments where she has a little more honesty, mostly, when she's very, very drunk, which I can understand. She's basically like gulping martinis the entire time during the movie and then spitting out little bits of reality.
Venom.
And I'm like, and Venom. I'm like, I feel that.
You
I
get
feel
it,
that,
right?
Margot.
You've been there.
I kind of, I'm there a lot. So
yeah,
she's kind of, I kind of look up to Margot Channing in a way that, maybe I should another time, but I don't really care.
I mean, I don't really need to say more about Bette Davis than I have already said. She's an incredible force of nature. I feel like, I mean, this is now, the 9th time that I'm even talking about her. So, yeah.
Her 9th nomination.
Yeah, obviously love her. But yes, Anne Baxter, I think, is an actress that I don't have a strong relationship with on the whole outside of this. Like, not even her Oscar win. I really feel like it's obviously good, but it's not like one of the most memorable supporting turns that have won that Oscar. So I guess I also feel like I haven't seen her in a whole lot of things, or at least if I have, that isn't as memorable as this. But needless to say, I sort of, when I think about this film, I do sort of have always looked at it as sort of like the Bette Davis show. But I did find Anne Baxter to be quite a bit more affecting and a lot better than I remembered on this rewatch. Maybe it's just because I was really more intently focusing on her because I already sort of knew all the Bette Davis isms that are memed to history. But yeah, I feel like she really kind of, I don't know if she fully matches what Bette Davis is delivering, just like at her peak there, but there's just something kind of delicious for me about what she's bringing to this, which I would say is a more difficult part on the whole than Margot.
I think so. I agree. And
Yeah.
she just, it was so funny. When you watch something now, you have to watch it with your 2022 knowledge and vision and eyes and everything. And I love her 600 people is so the 99 people in the room at the time. I absolutely love that. And I, never would have thought about that without Lady Gaga's A Star Is Born coming out, so when you see that, you sort of feel that you're always kind of on, you're always performing, and she is always performing.
Right.
I love
it's meta
her.
in that way.
It's extremely meta. Her Saracen speech is, if there's nothing else, there's applause. And I just, She's here for the applause, applause,
Yeah,
applause.
I mean, it
That's
is a
it.
very Gaga part, I
It's
suppose,
ab-
in that
it,
respect.
it very much is, and I
Yeah,
love her for that.
yeah. Yeah, it's not like a full transformation necessarily because she was always kind of this way, you know. She was just very
She
good
was
at
born this way, even.
it. Well, there we have it. And she turned into a real Judas, didn't she?
Oh my God.
But it's like she was always this kind of calculated person, but the way that we view her probably, I mean, if you're watching it for the first time, I think the way you view her changes over the course of the film, where it's like in the beginning she's like this, eager fan who just wants to meet this Broadway legend, and there may be even something there that you can identify with, or at least I identify with as a fan of actresses and such, and like getting to meet someone that means something to you and telling this long story about how she got here and her husband dying in the war. And it's very syrupy. It's like these like sob stories we get sometimes on like American Idol and The Voice. Like, this is how I got here. What an inspirational tale.
It is. You have to have a built-in narrative, even if it's false. You have to
Exactly.
have a narrative to stand out.
Exactly. And she knew that. She was ahead of her time. But yeah, it's like everyone is won over by her except Thelma Ritter, of course, always in the right.
Legend.
But I think it's definitely just in watching the film again that you realize the layers that are going on there, where, yeah, I mean, she's pretty much made up this entire story, and she is putting on a performance, and everyone's just buying it hook, line, and sinker, basically. Even Margot, who's supposed to be this great actress herself.
I think what happens sometimes is that you also want to buy the story. You will allow yourself to avoid red flags and bypass things because you want the story to be true, and you want, in your heart to believe that people are good and genuine and that their motives are altruistic. And that goes for All About Eve, that goes for a relationship, that goes for anything. You just kind of inherently want things to be true, so you go along with it as long as you possibly can.
Yeah. I feel like just in the first half, it's like you can just look at that performance and be like, if you don't know what's coming, you can be like, oh, she's sweet, innocent. Maybe her character doesn't really know what she's doing. We have these like references to her being very genuine. Like Margot's boyfriend is saying that she has like a lack of pretense and is, she has moxie and all that kind of stuff. But obviously knowing her story in the end, we definitely see the calculations happening with what Eve is doing by just really insinuating herself into their lives. And she's literally using her skills as an actress to then become a professional actress.
Exactly.
So, yeah, there are these layers, and I think you can definitely appreciate it on a rewatch. And I think it's because Anne Baxter is not like a Bette Davis type that she projects as like a sweet, plain, sort of humble woman, I suppose, that you are able to buy what she's selling in the beginning to then
Absolutely.
make that transition feel genuine.
Yeah, especially when we get to the end with Phoebe.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and the tables have turned, and at that point, Eve is so cynical when she's just laying there, like splayed out on the couch with the cigarette. Her voice is so different. It's even lower, and it's just so I've seen it all. And it's almost, she knows what Phoebe is doing, but I feel like the cycle's going to continue and she's going to let it happen.
Yep.
I love it. It's such a perfect screenplay. It's perfect.
One of the best, probably the best screenplay.
Yeah.
So,
which is why it's been oft imitated so many times.
Exactly. Yes. So then you contrast that with Margot, and she's been in the business for a while. She knows the ins and outs of everything, and she's built this big career for herself, so she doesn't really need to prove herself anymore. I mean, obviously she does just in her job as an actor, but it's like, I don't know, it's like Patti LuPone. Like, she's very well-versed.
Oh my God, I love that comparison.
Well, yeah, that's sort of the analogy that I think of. Just this diva of Broadway. Like,
Yeah.
and there's no one greater than that. So
Yeah.
she could sort of say whatever she wants, right? You could see her yelling at, people in the audience if whatever version of someone having their phone out is
Oh
in
my God.
1950.
I love that.
Um,
Yeah, I agree completely.
but it's like she has her little community or circle of friends, and people might get frustrated with her at times because of how outspoken she can be, but yeah, I mean, she's a fighter, and that's pretty perfect for Bette Davis, who was definitely known for sticking up for herself off screen, I should say, even if it meant making for a somewhat uncomfortable dynamic sometimes on her sets. This is open knowledge. This is not gossip.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's just easier for us in the audience to just, on the first watch, to latch on to what Betty is doing, because you know exactly what she's feeling at all times. Like, it's all in her face, even when she's saying nothing. Like, from the very first shot at the awards ceremony, and she's smoking and having a drink, and she's just like dripping with contempt for Eve.
That little oh my God.
Yes,
It's
the ash. Yes.
oh,
It's
it's
all in the eyes. Those Bette Davis eyes. Yeah.
this is one of those cases where you match an actor in a role in a way that is so perfect, but at the same time, you are helped as an audience member to know background and history of that actor and why it's such a perfect casting, and why, Bette Davis's own Hollywood history aligns in so many ways with this in terms of strength and just viability as an actress, and the willingness to fight for herself in a way. And I think about like that ad that she took out. There was just kind of no one really doing it like her, and that happens almost like decade to decade, where you only have a couple of actresses, and we're really just talking about actresses in this situation,
Yep.
that are allowed to have that voice and that strength and that assertiveness that men are allowed to have. So Bette Davis as Margot Channing is, like the screenplay, just among the very best of all time. It's cemented. This is such a case where you almost don't want to separate the actor from the role, because why do you need to? It's impossible. Yeah. They are inextricably linked, and in the best way possible. But yeah, I am obsessed with this performance because it is funny. You gave like I said, the quote that I love maybe more than any other. I mean, fasten your seatbelts obviously is the all-timer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can put that award where your heart ought to be, and delivered with such like happy gusto.
Yes.
It makes it even just sharper and more devastating. I mean, she's basically a drag queen in this, in every possible way. And I'm obsessed with this performance.
Yes. I just love, like, even in the beginning when we go to the first flashback of her in the dressing room, and she tells the playwright, like, write me one about a nice normal woman who shoots her husband. Which is, like, when I think about it, that's, like, absolutely what a Bette Davis performance would be in, like, the early 40s. Like, the letter is, like, right there. Mm-hmm. But she's just so fun and just playful in her line delivery that it's just so fun to watch. And yeah, there's something fascinating about how Betty plays Margot as this woman who's so sure of herself, but she recognizes something in Eve, and I don't know if she's like conscious of it at first, because again, she seems very taken by her little story. But the moment I love is just another one of those scenes that doesn't have any dialogue at all, but it just reveals so much about both of them, where Margot she's now hired her on as an assistant sort of thing, and Eve has Margot's dress, and she goes out on stage when she thinks no one's around, no one's looking, and she sort of like does a little bow and like pretends to be getting the applause and all that, and we see Margot watching her from backstage and is kind of like sizing her up and down, like, oh, like now I see what the deal is here with Eve. Like, she's not like this humble farm girl like come to the city. Like, I feel like it's game recognizing game almost, and it's like she sort of files it away in her mind, and it never really gets brought up. Like, I don't think she even really talks about it with Eve, but it's such a revealing scene and such a standout for both of them. I mean, it's interesting because in the Criterion release of this film, there's an essay that talks about how when we think about All About Eve, we remember the big set pieces like the party and the award ceremony and all that, but it's like these little moments in between that really just reveal a lot about this very strange dynamic that's playing out and sort of evolving, and the power is shifting and everything. So
I totally agree. And one of the fascinating things about that is she is sizing her up. And I think she's looking at Eve in a very multifaceted way. Because on top of being a story about how Hollywood views older and younger women, it's also a story about how women are with each other in the industry. And I don't think at first that she's looking at Eve as her replacement, because Margot does potentially want other things, but she's also blasting the idea that she has to want other things than what she has. The commentary is just so ahead of its time. So I think what happens for Margot to me is that she does kind of realize that there will be a transition from her to Eve. It's inevitable. And rather than absolutely fight it, what I think she does is test Eve to see if she can be at her level when she gets there, so that she can stay there as long as she can. Because I think Margot feels like it was her tenacity that got her there and kept her there. And you cannot be a naive and genuine and innocent girl in this industry. You do have to be tough, and you have to be able to stand up to men and to other women. So I think she's in a way testing her, and even, I don't want to use this word, but grooming her in a way to make sure that she can stand it.
Mm-hmm.
And she does.
Yeah. And I think what you just said is another testament to the brilliance of the screenplay, because none of that is even really spelled out, you know? It's not like Margot saying like, okay, I see you, I'm going to do this, this, and this. It's very subtle the way that it's approached. So what else? I mean, we can obviously talk about the party, which is truly an iconic set piece. Like, it's hard to even, not talk about I don't know how long it is, feels like 20 minutes. But a fantastic party. We've all been to one of these, haven't we? Where it's just, there's a little bit of tension happening. Obviously, you said the iconic line, "Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy night." And
again, just delivered with such glee. She's just like, here we go.
Yes. I forgot that also we have a really good moment for Anne here too, where she's on the stairs. Eve is like talking about how great it would be to have these hundreds of people in the audience applauding for her, and she starts talking a little too much about like how great that would be, and everyone's kind of looking around like, cool, great, yeah, I don't know what this girl's deal is, but like, yeah, that would be great. And
it's a little bit of like the villain revealing their plot, like a little bit too early or something, and you're like, oh, okay, we see you now.
Yes.
But keep talking.
Right. Yeah, and we also get this moment of her very subtly manipulating Celeste Holm, Karen. And yeah, she's trying to be Margot's little understudy, and she's really sort of leaning into the whole humble, doe-eyed sort of act.
I could
And
never
just,
do that.
yes, exactly. Just, I think honestly that whole part of the film, like the whole party is just everyone's firing on all cylinders. We get Marilyn Monroe in, like it's just such a feast, you know?
Yeah, just Marilyn Monroe popping in for the brief time that she's there, and I think we'll end up talking about her later. But yeah, I love her. I love her in that. But
yeah,
they do not do Hollywood parties like this anymore. I mean, this was the era for that, and my goodness. And I mean, like in the movies, like we don't really get to see this kind of. A movie would never spend this much time at this party, which is revealing so much plot and character, but at the same time being so massively entertaining.
Exactly. Yeah. It works once again. I feel like we're praising the script even more than the performances at this point, but working on so many different levels. We also get some really great vulnerable stuff from Bette here, you know, which again might not be as memorable as some of the one-liners, but when she's talking to the playwright about how she's 40 and she's like starting to feel vulnerable about her age and everything, and she's just totally, I mean, she's wasted by this point, let's be real. Like she's just gone. But she's reached that point in the party where she's just sort of like Eve, maybe revealing a little too much about her inner psyche. And we're really seeing some actual like anxiety there that maybe her time's up. And, you know, I think if we didn't have scenes like that, like if this was just a send up of show business sort of thing, and we get the ending that we get, that we might not care as much about how all this sort of what happens to these characters. And it could feel very cynical in a way. But the fact that we do get these scenes that are humanizing Margot very much, even though she's only 40, like, you know, it's one of these things where when she says that, oh, I'm 40, I might have to retire. Like
it kills me.
Yeah.
It absolutely kills me to hear that.
But
yeah, you're absolutely right. She has some beautifully sympathetic moments, and they are when she is pretty much at her drunkest.
Yeah.
And she does a really good drunk, because she's not about slurring words. She's about gestures. Mm-hmm. as much as when she's sober. Like, you know, somebody trying to put water in her whiskey, she'll just brush them off with a wisp of her hand.
Yes.
And when she's extremely drunk here, she just brushes her hair from her face so that she can take the drink. These are choices that only somebody of her caliber could possibly make, because they say so much. But yeah, she gets to go from, you know, you're in a beehive, we're all busy little bees, and the first time she really attacks Eve, and publicly,
mm-hmm.
To those moments like when she is just sitting with the piano player, and she can be more honest with somebody who isn't in her inner circle. I could just watch just this whole sequence every day.
Right. Yeah. I just like that we get these moments that are more vulnerable, that for these characters, and even by the end, we have like a moment of Eve sort of realizing maybe all like my conniving bullshit wasn't really worth it in the end. I don't know, because I'm alone. Because like, am I actually happy? I don't know. So that feels like, for me, another slightly humanizing moment towards the end. Not to jump ahead, but I mean, actually, while we're talking about it, another great vulnerable scene for Bette is when Eve sort of makes this big plan to arrange for Karen to sabotage Margot by making her late for the performance. And there's this scene in the car that the two of them share. It's Bette and Celeste. And again, Margot's just sort of opening up about how she doesn't really even know maybe who she is outside of like the bright lights sort of thing. Like, who is she behind this version of herself that's in the spotlight, which she's been for so long? And I think that is a very understandable concern, and it's another element that really sets up her decision to leave the business is by the end is that now she's sort of just looking to find herself again. And the way that she plays the sort of vulnerability of that, I think, is very impactful because of how much it just sort of contrasts with the other scenes where she's fully in command. Like, this is a fully fleshed out human being. Like, this isn't just, again, sort of like a two-dimensional sort of camp icon as much as it already is, but like there's more to it than that, I guess.
Very much. And she's confiding in, a person that she feels that she has great trust in, who is sabotaging her literally in the moment. And I think, again, as a part of how much this understands celebrity and being a star, a lot of people don't know or don't care or don't realize that when you do reach a certain level of stardom, your inner circle gets smaller and smaller because the ability to trust gets less.
Mm-hmm.
And for Margot, pretty much everyone in her inner circle is a saboteur in some form. It's not that she puts her trust in the wrong people, though. I don't think. I think that it is, and it certainly was until Eve came along. But it's a sad moment, a really sad moment, because it does reveal that, other than maybe Birdie, she doesn't really have the people around her that she thought that she did. And that's just, regardless of your industry, is not a great place to be.
Yeah. Well, what I find just really interesting about the film as I'm watching it is that, like, we're talking about these humanizing scenes for her where it feels like for so much of the middle towards the end, like, this really does feel like the Bette Davis show, because Anne Baxter's kind of missing from quite a few scenes.
Yes.
Right? And it sort of feels like, oh, it's like the Allison Janney moment in I, Tonya. Like, my storyline's disappearing. Even though she's obviously being mentioned quite a lot. It's, she's not physically there. But, of course, we get the turn at the restaurant, I would say, is when things really shift back to Eve, where Eve is talking with Karen and is really manipulating her once again into just sort of getting her husband to cast her as the lead in his new play. And she's using the leverage of Karen having previously betrayed Margot as basically blackmail.
And she's using, at the beginning, she's using that very Eve lilt,
yep,
which is higher and more, but we should do this. And then she turns and says, well, you don't want me to reveal your little secret, do you? And it's just, and that for me was actually when I had like the Kathleen Turner moment, where it's this is such a terrible comparison, but it's like in Serial Mom when she does the Pussy Willows, it just,
oh my God,
she takes that turn, so that Karen knows what's going on, and that there is no
means business. Yeah.
That it's it. Yeah. You're done.
My favorite part of that is when Karen is standing up and she's just like, you better sit down. You look a bit wobbly. I live for that moment because that's like, mask off. Here I am. This is the real me. It's like a villain reveal, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of chilling, I would say. She does with the voice. You're right. It's just really, oof. Because that's really the moment where Eve is like ready to make the kill, because Addison like calls her a killer at one point, and she's like, oh, she sort of denies it in a way, but it's true. Like, she didn't really exhibit like that kind of aggressive behavior as much earlier in the film, that you definitely feel the impact of that moment later on, which I think is a credit to her performance and once again to the screenplay, that you feel the impact of that turn. So,
and she knows in that moment that I think everybody kind of knows, and that facade, it's just like, I'm dropping it, and from here on in that this is it. You know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. Here we are.
Right.
This is me.
This is me. Yeah. And by the end, of course, we have this big blow up scene with Eve and Addison, of course, played by the great George Sanders. The
My
only
God.
Oscar win for this performance full of female performances dominating, but still is one of the best supporting actor performances of all time. Not that this is a supporting actor podcast, but one of my top 10. Let's say that.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
but it's like Addison sort of wants to get back at her for using him in their little manipulation schemes with Karen, and we get the revelation of her not actually being Eve. Her name is actually Gertrude.
Gertrude. The shame of it all.
Yeah, that's something about the name Gertrude just makes it even sweeter, I would say. But yeah, she's like made up her whole backstory, and she's sweating in this moment, and it's sort of fun to see her in that mode, which we haven't really seen her in up to this point. And so yeah, you have this dynamic where like he's blackmailing her into being with him, and it's sort of vague exactly what that means. And I think there's a little bit of coding happening, possibly. I'm not really sure, but there's been theories about certain things with these characters.
Yes. I'm with you on that coding.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Yes.
much.
They
Very
have
much.
a bit of an arrangement, I suppose.
Exactly, because it's, I mean, everything about Addison DeWitt is, is very, is he,
Sure.
because he's,
I know what you are.
I mean, yes.
That's what they're seeing in each other.
Yes, they are absolutely, it is very much that.
Yeah.
And yes, it is hilarious and ironic that Sanders was the only, winner amongst 5 nominees and 4 of them being women.
Yeah.
But I also, like, at the beginning, I know we love all of Margot Channing's lines, but his I'm a critic, I am essential to the theater is so fucking hilarious. I love that, and I love it more now than I did then, only because the profession of criticism is so different than it was, but in so many ways is not when you self-elevate. I love it. It is so funny.
He's incredible. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think a little too uncomfortable for some people. Like, I was seeing someone who you might turn into, or maybe you're already there for certain critics. Anyway, to go back to the beginning of which is the awards ceremony, which is technically the end. Eve winning the award. It's the happiest moment of her life, quote unquote. And I think what's really palpable in Anne Baxter's performance is definitely just that sense of, here it is. This was what it was all building up to. Why am I still feeling kind of not great, And I think she really delivers that in a very subtle way. Whereas, of course, we have Margot with that incredible, devastating line that we mentioned about putting the award where your heart ought to be. It's, I think that they just both end really strong, but for very different reasons,
Absolutely.
Both in keeping with their characters.
And that's the thing for Eve, is that she has created Eve quite literally as a character, as a real life character. And even though all of these people around her know that it's fake and that she's fake, she has to still do this. So she has to maintain this persona around, this theater group and everybody and anybody else. And she'll have to when she goes to Hollywood the next week. And how long can she maintain that? Because one of the things that's not the same about Eve and Margot is that Margot is Margot, and that's it. She doesn't have to maintain a facade of anything. Eve has to maintain a facade that is not just, it's just not going to last.
Yeah. Eve is Gertrude.
That's
who Eve is. You'll always be Gertrude to me. But I don't find them interchangeable to the degree that they would split any votes. So I'll just dispel that notion right away. I'm just really happy that they were both nominated together and rightfully in lead. Because I don't know if we got a question about this later on, but you got to imagine if this comes out today, they're frauding Anne Baxter into supporting.
Oh,
right?
She's getting Rooney Mara. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So.
It is fascinating, though, actually, speaking of Rooney Mara, that Bette Davis won New York and won Cannes. Rooney Mara had won Cannes over Cate Blanchett, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And Anne Baxter came in with nothing, really. There wasn't a whole lot back then as there are now, but she had no major nominations of any kind.
She really didn't. Not even a Golden Globe. Not that there were many nominations at that time, but yeah.
Yes.
So.
But yeah, she would absolutely be frauded into supporting now. It's not even a question. But I'm totally also 100% with both of them being lead, and obviously anybody who knows me knows how I feel about vote splitting.
Yes.
So, although I know we'll get into that conversation later, specifically to this, and
of course,
I think we can hopefully have a nuanced version of a vote splitting conversation than what people like to throw out as just a reason for not getting what they want.
Ooh, I love that. Spicy. I'm ready. All right, so that's Anne Baxter. That's Bette Davis. That was a lot of fun. We spent like an hour talking about All About Eve.
I just realized it. Yeah,
I think it's time to move on to our next nominee, shall we?
Let's go.
All right. Eleanor Parker for Caged. So here we go. We have an actress who we will be talking about 3 times on this series, including now. This is her first of 3 nominations, all of them in the 50s. So you'll hear the extent of my Eleanor Parker through this season. I feel like at the same time, though, like Sound of Music sort of feels like her most iconic role at this point when we look back, right?
Yes.
The Baroness.
It's impossible not to and speak. Yeah. Incredibly
somehow
iconic.
Didn't get a nomination.
And somehow should have and won.
Baffling to this day for me. But anyway, before Caged, she got her start in the early 40s. And her first big notable role was Pride of the Marines. But what I also found funny just in doing research about her is that she'd also sort of played in roles that we've already talked about this in this Best Actress series. Like she was in a different adaptation of Human Bondage, speaking of Bette Davis, and she was in an adaptation of Escape Me Never, which was Elizabeth Bergner. So kind of weird, but I also think maybe this is something we can get into with this performance here, but there's a handful of similarities here with Caged, with sort of what Olivia de Havilland is doing in The Snake Pit, which was a few years before this. So, anyway, she was apparently...
And it is funny, sorry, it's funny that you
ahead.
mentioned the of Human Bondage, because there are so many of these stories, even just within this year, of, kind of how small the circle was of who was going to do what, and it's the degrees of separation between a lot of these actresses was very small. Yeah,
very, very small world at this time. But apparently she was known for turning down roles that she didn't feel were up to snuff, to which I say, good for her. But it did cause her to have her contract dropped a few times. But then she found this role in Caged, which she actively sought out and fought for. So again, good for her. The film was taken to Venice, where she won Best Actress. So let's talk about it. She plays Marie Allen, who's a 19-year-old who is sentenced for being an accessory to armed robbery with a charge of 1 to 15 years in prison, which is kind of a wild range. But the film is almost entirely set in this women's prison, where at first she's in over her head, sort of learning the ropes about how everything works. She has to deal with this matron who is very brutal. And yeah, Hope Emerson, who also has a nomination in supporting actress here. But over time, we see how the Marie becomes a little bit more hardened to the prison lifestyle. So let's talk about it. I don't know if you have super strong feelings about Eleanor Parker one way or the other, but what do you think of her, and what do you think of this performance in Cage, which, as you sort of mentioned earlier, is maybe the most forgotten one of this bunch?
I think it's the most forgotten, and I think it's also subsequently been one of the more maligned for reasons that I'll get into that in a second. I don't have a whole lot of thoughts about Eleanor Parker,
Yeah.
and mentioning Sound of Music is really kind of one of the reasons why.
Yeah.
It's not that she is forgettable or anything like that. It just you kind of hook your claws into a single performance as a defining one for an actor sometimes, and I think for her it is the Baroness in The Sound of Music.
Yeah.
And this is coming from a gay campy perspective, because it is also, she's a villain. She's like a Disney villainess.
Yeah.
And the gays love a Disney villainess, so it makes it extremely memorable as a result. But on the rewatch of Caged, and yeah, she is 28 playing 19 in this.
Yeah.
And I'll say, I think she is passable enough. I think she's pretty darn good. And I'm not going like, well, good try. I think she's really good. The thing that kind of happened with this movie, though, is all of the very lesbianic qualities of women in prison films that this era was really kind of obsessing with. So to stand outside of the extra bad campy ones and do something good and be good was honestly an exception. And there are so many similarities with all of these films and performances this year, really unlike almost any in Oscar history.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Marie Allen is innocent, naive, and has to learn harder ways to survive and exist. Very Eve. She goes in guileless, not like Eve with a motive, right. But she does have to change and morph in order to survive, while still maintaining humanity and a softness to her. The whole thing with the kitten, and oh my God, I do want to talk about that because that is like extremely triggering. So that's all we'll say about that.
Yep.
But yeah, when Evelyn is introducing herself to Marie Allen as I'm the one that runs this joint. You can get things like cigarettes and stuff from me if you pay the price. And we know the price is money. We also know the price is probably something more than that. And she does the whole sit in this chair. It's kind of roomy. You're just like, scene, and another scene later got picked up in the conversation about LGBTQ representation in movies, and it's always in a very negative light when the clips from this movie are used, and understandably so, in whatever context that you want to give it. But this was also a movie that was doing more and shining a light on a section of women that is absolutely not seen. And I was more impressed with it in this rewatch than I ever had been before. And I think that is, again, you watch something at 18, you watch something at 30, you watch something later, your own personal experience is different. The world's experience is different. So you just look at things with a very different eye. And so I was much more sympathetic to the elements that are cherry picked out for their negativity. And I just think it has a lot to say. And I really think that Eleanor Parker is very, very good.
Yeah, I agree. What I like about Eleanor Parker here is that she is easily the most grounded and naturalistic performance here. Like, we got a lot of theatricality going on in quite a few of these. Whereas this feels like a performance that might be something that you would see more later down the line, kinds of styles of acting. For some reason, I don't know why, but when I watched this movie, I was reminded of something like what Sissy Spacek would do in the 70s, like in Badlands, or even like, I guess even Carrie to a certain extent, where you see some of the innocence there, and it's obviously with those very expressive eyes for Sissy. Eleanor Parker doesn't quite have that, but she sort of makes you feel for the character, but there's also a bit of darkness there underneath that. Like, she's capable of darkness, I suppose. And she doesn't necessarily, like, telegraph that from the beginning, I don't think. But by the time you get to the end, it's like, it's not like her transformation comes out of thin air, I would say. You know? Even though these feels like two different people by the beginning and the end, it feels like she was always capable of becoming that more hardened criminal type than she was at the beginning. I will also say that this is the only film that I had not seen before.
Oh.
From this lineup.
Oh my gosh.
So this was a first watch for me. This is just one of those where I knew that I was going to get to it eventually with this, and I just waited till now to watch it.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting, especially in reading up, you know, some of the stuff you were saying about the historical context of things. It's very interesting to watch in 2022, I suppose. It's a complicated type of thing, because I agree that this feels like something that generally Hollywood didn't really touch as much in 1950. And so naturally there's going to be some, I don't know, I suppose growing pains with trying to figure out how to portray certain types of characters on screen. But yeah, she was the one for me where I had no expectation really going into it, other than her being considered like the other of this group. But I feel like she doesn't deserve to be the other necessarily. I think this is again a performance that feels so different than the other four that I think people who are sort of maybe, I don't know, turned off by some of the theatricality elsewhere in this lineup could be like, ooh, at least we have Eleanor Parker, you know? Some of the, you know, how some people get.
Yes, we do. We know.
Yeah. Not calling out any of our friends in particular, but I know that there's some Eleanor Parker fans maybe listening.
And again, it's not like I am or I'm not in either way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so glad to have been invited to this podcast for this year, because I probably would not have revisited this film anytime soon. In thinking about The Celluloid Closet, which was the book and the film that uses this movie as one of its like finger pointing moments, and understandably so, completely, at least for the time. I love that there were so many B-movie kind of things about women's prison. And it was the lascivious nature that was the main focus, rather than the time that this gives to Agnes Moorehead trying to run the prison and what that takes. I mean, there are budget talks in this movie. This is not just about like, oh, are they going to lesbian each other? What's going on here? There's a lot more going on here than that.
Yeah. The beginning of the film for Eleanor Parker, I don't want to say it would necessarily be easy, but sort of standard for a lot of different actresses, maybe, in the sense of just like, you're just playing this innocent young woman who is in over her head. She doesn't think she belongs in this prison full of people who might have done more extreme sort of offenses. I did pick up on this while watching it, which is what a lot of Letterboxd reviews have mentioned as well. There are some similarities with Orange is the New Black in the sense of like, you have this conventionally attractive young white woman who is entering prison, and she's like a fish out of water. She doesn't really feel like she's a criminal necessarily. Like, there's like that weird separation there. And a lot of it is just sort of adjusting to this new culture and meeting all the colorful characters and everything, and like seeing the corruption. And luckily she's not anywhere near as like clueless or like annoying as Piper Chapman. But I could have seen a lot of younger actresses taking on that part of the role at the beginning and just doing like a fine job, and it wouldn't have been a nomination necessarily, but it would have been fine.
Yeah.
But then what I think Eleanor Parker does is sort of exceeds from there and proves why she was right for the part, is just her expressiveness, I think, is just like she's absolutely terrified of the unknown. Like she doesn't want to be here in the slightest, and she communicates that sort of fear really well, just like in her eyes. And it's like eyebrow acting, like great eyebrow acting for me watching her here, which is tricky, but she finds a really good blend of like not necessarily overacting that sense of like, oh shit, like what am I gonna do here, but not really downplaying it to the feeling of like blankness like I would imagine someone like a Jean Crane would do, or a Dorothy McGuire, for example. Sorry.
Oh my god, I love these drags though.
Yes.
Well, poor Jean. If Jean Crane was alive, she'd be dead now.
We're in a beef. Me and Jean.
Yes. Hey, but I have my own with Janet Gaynor, as you know. So
yes,
we all have to have our enemies.
Yes. Of course.
It's fascinating too. She doesn't even speak for like almost the first 5 minutes of the movie. Everything is like her shocked and speechless.
Yeah.
But to your point earlier and just a moment ago, you can see in her face and in her eyes that she has the ability to go into darkness later.
Yeah.
And without that, this is a lesser performance. This is a B movie performance without that. And that's why she is that good. And it's why she got the nomination.
Yeah. And this is a slight non sequitur also, but speaking of comparisons, when I was watching her in the beginning, maybe it was her haircut and her eyebrows, just her look, something about it reminded me a lot of Sarah Goldberg in Barry. I don't know why.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Anyone out there, if you look at Eleanor Parker in Caged, just like...
I will go with you on that journey.
Yeah. It just felt like, also, I feel like she could have done a role like this, Sarah Goldberg. Just saying. She's certainly capable of that darkness, as we saw in the last season of Barry.
Yes,
anyway.
For sure.
Yes.
I also absolutely love and respect the commitment that Eleanor Parker has in this, getting her head shaved while she's being pinned down. Like, that did not happen. She's serving Natalie Portman V for Vendetta realness here.
Totally.
And it's really happening. I mean, that's a different kind of commitment than we were used to, because 1950 was still an era of theater to film being the thing, and you wouldn't be able to shave your head. You would just have to do a mock-up somehow, or it would be like another person or a stand-in, and you would just see the head. It just that is a commitment from 1950.
Yeah, and that's also part of bringing it back to the Olivia de Havilland in the Snake Pit. That's where I sort of connected, is that sense of like, I'm going to like, vanity free type of performance here, which is quite unique for the time period, as you're saying.
It's so funny because, again, one of the other moments that is pulled out in the celluloid closet is when they're starting to rough up Evelyn, and she's at the dining table just saying, kill her, and it is absolutely psychotic. It's psychotic. And the first thing I thought of actually was Sandy Dennis in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, just doing violence.
Yeah,
it just totally made me think of that. But again, I'm watching this with such a different eye from, I don't know, I think it was the early 90s when I did see this for the first time. And everything feels different, and everything feels, I don't know. That moment is really terrifying. Just her in that moment. But also Hope Emerson in that moment. She's a large, impressive woman. Yeah. She is terrified in that moment and really expresses it extremely well. She's
Yeah.
really, really good.
I don't think that I was ready for what Hope Emerson was about to bring to the table here, because she makes a huge impression.
Parker is good in part because of Emerson. If Emerson
Yeah,
was
that's true.
too cartoony,
Mm-hmm.
if they would be going up against each other in different movies, essentially
Right.
in different things, and it really wouldn't work. But they're working at the same level.
Yeah. And I like what she's able to sort of, I feel like story-wise, everything that Hope Emerson is bringing is making Eleanor Parker, it makes you feel that much more sympathy for her. And I think she plays a lot of the moments of sort of horror really well. Like when one of her other inmates is denied parole and she hangs herself, like just seeing the shock of that is just really, really palpable and very visceral to me. Or like when she's talking with her mother and
Mhm.
realizing that actually, no, my mother is not going to raise my baby. Like, what am I going to do now? And she's like screaming. And I mean, like later on, like realizing that she won't be out on parole after the parole board says that she won't have a good job lined up on the outside world. And she goes out and like tries to escape. There's just like an immediacy sort of to what she brings to it that it feels almost like intimate in a way, like how you really feel a connection with her. And so yeah, I mean, I will say that it's, for me, it's kind of a shame that the film isn't quite on her level. I still think it's an engaging film and quite ahead of its time in certain ways, but it's sort of, I feel like it kind of wanders over to other parts and other characters, like this sort of rivalry between the two women, the two older women, and the whole like the whole barter
Kitty.
system of, right.
Oh, Kitty.
I just sort of wish we really stayed in Marie's point of view the whole time, because I think it would have actually even been more of a knockout performance here and more of a journey. And instead, I mean, it's actually kind of like a true parallel with Orange is the New Black in that respect, where it's like over time, there was just more interesting stories to tell in that prison than Piper.
Point.
So
yeah, that's a totally fair point. And I think one thing that's kind of fascinating about the other women's stories is that generally most of the rest of the inmates are much older. They are hardened time criminals that will likely never leave, including obviously the one that's like 70 something years old and in bed, and she's just this is gonna be you. I did find that to be a great way for Parker's Marie Allen to envision her future. We almost kind of needed that, but I'm with you that you either kind of have to go all the way with supporting stories or pull back, and it's somewhere kind of in the middle.
Yeah. And I think there's just maybe a little bit of connective tissue that's missing sometimes. Like she, after the whole kitten incident, she's put away into solitary confinement for like 3 days, right? And I feel like we don't really check in on her during that time until she comes out.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like could have been nice to have seen her go through at least some of that.
But also, too, it's like 3 days. And, you know, I have never been in prison and solitary confinement, but I was like, 3 days? Come on, girl.
Yeah, that's true.
You can manage.
Yeah. But it would have been some good, interesting, dramatic material for her, at least.
Yes.
But I do think her last scene is definitely a fun one with her and Agnes Moorehead, who is really the only real sympathetic figure, you know, within the authorities, at least at the prison. And she wants to give her the benefit of the doubt. But even in the end, she can tell like that this job that she's lined up after prison, like this cashier's job, is it's not really like going the straight and narrow here. Like she's going through this like shoplifting gang system that she gets involved with. So yeah, even if they're not really saying it out loud, I feel like they're both like, we know what the deal is going to be here. And that's why in the end she's like, you know what, you don't have, you keep her file, like she'll be back.
And that's
interesting ending. Yeah.
It is, and again, I think that's kind of why the older crowd, you do have to kind of keep them in your mind, because once you get to the end, you know that that's the ending for Marie Ellen too, most likely.
Yeah. I mean, this could have been like an after school special kind of message by the end where she just like totally reforms herself in the end. But instead, she
Yes.
goes down a even darker path.
Yes. I
So,
love it for 1950.
anything else on Eleanor before we move on to our final losing nominee?
Let's move on. Oh my goodness.
Well, we've got a big one here. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh
Deep breath. Gloria Swanson, Sunset Boulevard. I am so excited to finally be talking about this performance. We talked about Gloria Swanson twice in the first season for this Best Actor series, nominated for Sadie Thompson at the very first awards, and then The Trespasser a few years later. She tried to make the transition to talkies, but it wasn't entirely successful. And she took a break from film for a while, only making a few here and there. And her last film before Sunset Boulevard was in 1941. So, huge break from the screen. There's varying accounts on like whether Gloria was the only person in mind to play this project at the start. Apparently Billy Wilder had wanted Mae West, but she just rejected it outright.
I think we're all thankful for that.
Yeah, probably, yes. But they reached out to Greta Garbo, which I've mentioned many times in the 40s. They're always reaching out to Greta Garbo. She's always saying no. Why do they even bother at that point? Norma Shearer would have been interesting. Mary Pickford certainly would be interesting. But yeah, those are all names that we've talked about in the very first season. So
yeah,
there's always that sense that we're going to get someone who was big in the silent era. That was inherently a part of it, which is smart and interesting. But it was George Cukor who actually mentioned Gloria Swanson to Billy Wilder, and she agreed to do it, and here we are. So this is another big one where I feel like if you haven't seen it, what are you doing here? But I'll just give you a quick lowdown. She's playing Norma Desmond. She was a huge star back in the silent era of film, but once again wasn't able to transition to the talkies. So she lives in her huge mansion on Sunset Boulevard, watching her old films, only lives with her butler, and one day there's this struggling screenwriter, Joe, played by William Holden, who happens upon this mansion, and she invites him in, and it's all basically like bringing him into her web, I would say, because she has this script and she wants to launch her big comeback, even though it's pretty clear at a certain point that she's sort of lost her mind maybe a little bit after being cooped up in this mansion for so long. Let's talk about it. Gloria Swanson, Sunset Boulevard, legendary performance. Does it still endure? What do you think of the legendary Gloria Swanson and probably her most famous performance here?
This is so much like Bette Davis in All About Eve, where it really could only be one person for it to work, because this is telling a story of Hollywood. This is meta on top of meta. And yeah, I mean, the other names you mentioned would be kind of cool and fascinating, but they would not have the same impact. And again, that for the viewer and the audience, your enjoyment increases when you know this and when you're invested as a part of your watching it. Then it's just much richer.
Right.
I've seen this several times,
Yep.
and as much as scenes have been parodied and even mocked throughout time, it stands up completely for me. I found much more sympathy in Norma Desmond than in previous viewings. Again, I'm not the same person I am now that I was 20 years ago. So I come at this from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's very easy to as great as the film is, as great uh, as she is, I think you can look at it superficially as a crazy woman, a woman unhinged and deluded, and all of these things. But I just found so much more sympathy this time around. I had it before, but even more now. I just felt it more now, all the way to the very end. I'm ready for my close-up. Mr. DeMille is one of the most famous lines in the history of film, but it was already there before, but the film shows her so much sympathy in that moment. Everybody that's on that set is giving her that moment out of a lot of things, sympathy, and they definitely do feel bad for her. And I think, the moment after the lights were off, she was probably hauled off to the loony bin, and that
Yep.
might have been the end that we would have seen of Norma Desmond, is that moment. But they were giving it to her. There's something called the sympathetic lie when you are dealing with people with dementia or Alzheimer's, where you don't correct or question the things that they're saying because their reality is theirs. There's nothing that you can say to argue or like fight it or change their mind. And
Right.
so you kind of go along with that in order to appease and keep them happy in a way. And so that's what's happening in that moment. And it sounds so strange because and I only bring up the Alzheimer's thing and the sympathetic lie thing, having gone through that with a relative and having to learn that language. And so I had more sympathy to her than I had in previous viewings. Aside from that, I know that was a long way to get to this, and I apologize. It's another fantastic movie about movies, about how things are made, about why things are made. I do love, from a personal place, being able to identify things in Hollywood that I know to be true now that I didn't before. I love the Miss Havisham of it all with her. I think Gloria Swanson, who is like only 52 at the time, and again we're doing the whole thing where like 52 is like, you're out of here. She was out of here even before that. I think she is so spry and light on her feet in this performance. She is, acting for the back seats because she comes from that world.
Right.
But there is a lightness to this performance that was so fun. And again, that I hadn't really picked up on before. I got so much more this time around than the last time I would have seen this.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Gloria Swanson. As listeners may know already, I said that she should have won the Oscar for her first two performances that she was nominated for. So she's 2 for 2 going into this discussion. We'll see later on if I would give her a third. But this is one of those performances for me where sometimes there's certain iconic roles on film where I like it, I respect it, what they mean for cinema and all that, but there's like a lack of passion there, or I don't feel like I have to champion it because everyone else already has. So it's like, who am I? One more person that's championing this beloved performance. But this is one of those rare cases for me, actually, where a performance 1,000% lives up to its reputation, and I feel passionate about it at the same time. And I think it's because it's just very apparent on the screen that Gloria Swanson just put her entire being into this role. Everything. Just all of her insecurities and feelings of weakness, and her strengths and her comedic talents, as you were mentioning, the lightness there. Just the physicality of it is what I really feel watching it. She doesn't let you see the sort of deterioration, I suppose. Like, she's keeping up her appearance. She's got this graceful air to her. And yet, I do think you're also seeing what's really going on sort of beneath the surface in almost every scene. Like, there's like the text and then there's the subtext with this performance. And I think she makes you feel a lot of sympathy for this person who, by the end of the film, she's shot the person who's supposed to be the protagonist of the film. She's used these like sort of kind of manipulation tactics, you could say. And again, I feel like there's versions of this story where she's just the out and out villain, right? But like when I watch this film, I completely understand Norma, and she approaches it in just the right way, where it's not like a pity party necessarily, but it's also not like she's so villainous that she seems like unreasonable. This is just a desperately lonely person, and it's caused her to become like a waxwork, like they say in the film about like her friends that just seem stuck in the past. And it's really the fault of the industry that these stars are sort of built up and then tossed aside. And when you don't have the right support system around you, and then all that fame is gone, how are you expected to be like a functioning person from that point onward? I just feel like she taps into that really well, because to a certain extent, like, there are probably elements of what Norma goes through here that Gloria herself probably felt and what she went through. So, once again, extremely meta, and one of these performances where it's impossible to separate the performer and the performance.
But it's exactly why it works. It had to be, honestly, so incredibly daunting and risky for her to do this. Totally. as a performer, she was really opening herself up to a vulnerability of and reality of her career. And also too, I mean, obviously you don't know how a performance or a film is going to live on after it's made, but when you have a person and performance that are completely inextricable, sometimes you associate that person and that performance as the same thing. A lot of people do that.
Which is exactly what she ran into, unfortunately, after this.
Exactly. And it was such an, honestly, when we talk about brave performances, this is a brave performance.
Totally.
100%. She was opening herself up to so much, not criticism, but just absolute issues of self-confidence and self-image in a way that, because we are so far from it now, that people absolutely associate Gloria Swanson and Norma Desmond as the same person. And that is, that's when the fact and fiction blur to a point that for entertainment purposes is wonderful.
Yeah.
But outside of that is almost kind of dangerous.
Right. Yeah. And I think she opened herself up also to ridicule. If this performance didn't work, then God only knows how people would have reacted to this. So yeah, it's brave as much as that can be overused. Like, this is a true example of that. I also think another important thing to talk about is just her line delivery and the way she speaks, because I've seen some sort of critiques about this performance saying it's too over the top and too theatrical. I feel like I understand that if you're looking at it just completely in a vacuum and you're like, what's going on here? Like, why is she speaking like that? But you have to look at sort of the reasoning behind why she's acting in that way. And it's because she's been like stuck in a loop, like a time loop, watching her old movies all the time. She doesn't seem to socialize all that much outside of her old Hollywood friends. And for her, it's like the name Norma Desmond in Lights, to bring it back to the from Bette Davis conversation, like, that's who she is. And it's all she has left. So it's like, of course she's going to speak in this more exaggerated tone and make these like weird contortions with her face and like gritting her teeth and all that, because she was a silent film star, and not only a star, but like one of the prime stars of the day. So she became that person, and she's now sort of stuck as that person in a sense. And she has like the pictures of herself all over the place. She's watching her old movies all the time. I do think, actually, by the way, one of the pictures she has is like literally a promotional still for Sadie Thompson.
I'm pretty sure that is the
Yeah.
case. Yes.
Yes. So obviously we have a footage of Queen Kelly, one of her early movies she's literally watching. So yeah, that's why she sort of feels like there's almost like an alien quality to her, where it's like she's been plucked out of 1929 or whatever, and she feels out of time in 1950, you know?
Very much, and it's there's even her voice and delivery is almost like a Catwoman. She would have been a great Catwoman.
Yes. It's very Eartha Kitt.
It's extremely Eartha Kitt, especially when she's like holding the cigarette and she's just
Yes.
her head is up and she's
love
looking, you know, with her eyes down like this, and she's just, it's amazing. And she has what is maybe my favorite line of the movie, and that's, we didn't need dialogue, we had faces.
Mm-hmm.
That is her whole thing. Is pulling faces. It's you know, she should be in the Vogue, Madonna's Vogue, but that's a whole nother story.
There you go, mentioning Madonna.
I know, I can't not do it. Isn't that?
Yes.
Yeah, I might again later. Who knows? We'll
Ooh.
see. The fascinating thing about what you just said about how her line delivery is sometimes criticized, that for me is where Gloria Swanson made the distinction between herself and between Norma Desmond, because I think you could probably approach Norma Desmond as this recluse who was not able to fire up zingers and really witty one-liners, but be so internalized that she would be almost immobile to speak, and she wouldn't say anything that either had any substance or had any bite or snap to it.
Yeah.
And that would be realistic, I think, for that to be the case. But they went another direction, and they gave her incredible dialogue, and she delivered it like that.
Yeah.
And for me, that is the distinction between Norma Desmond, the character, and Gloria Swanson, the actress. And for me, that's why it works more than anything else.
Yeah. She knows exactly how to make each of those lines pop, you know? But it's funny because you have to remember, like, Norma wasn't able to make that transition to the talkies. Mm-hmm. And you do wonder if the reason for that was her line delivery at that time. And whether it was too flat or too exaggerated like this, like, either way, something was wrong. And now she's sort of stuck in whatever that psychological feeling is. And, you know, again, the feeling of like her style of acting in front of the camera, I assume it is that more exaggerated tone. And because she's saying the pictures got small. So obviously she's this big, larger than life type of actress. So it's like, even though we have these big theatrical line deliveries on the surface, maybe that's also a subtextual thing too, where she just couldn't really adapt maybe back in the day, and she was too artificial, and maybe that's what caused people to move on from her. I don't know. Maybe that's thinking too many steps into it, but that's what I get from it.
Yeah, and also just, I mean, even though she's writing this massive adaptation of Salome, you know, going from no sound to talkies also required dialogue memory that was not before,
right?
And that could have been an issue for her. I mean, looking at all the scattered pages on her desk, she obviously has vocabulary, but I don't know, that might be one of the many things that didn't allow her to make that transition.
Well, she also, I think, has some good subtler moments, as much as you can call anything in this performance subtle, that maybe aren't as remembered, but really do help to make the performance, the character, well-rounded. Like when she's in the car with Joe, and she tells him, like, she's getting sick of seeing him in the same clothes all the time, and she's just like, I just want you to look nice. And must you chew gum?
Honestly, I am so completely with her in that because we had seen the same sport jacket and that like, jersey polo in
Yep,
him. And I'm like, you are right, Norma. Get it together, Joe.
exactly.
I was with her completely.
There's this sense you get that she really does wish it was like the old days again, and that there was like decorum and a certain way of being, which, I mean, also from what I understand is sort of how Gloria Swanson was and what she sort of believed in, like manners and held people to a certain standard. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
not as much of a stretch there, but certainly in
Mm-hmm.
keeping with Gloria. But you have moments like that. You have like the part where they're at the big New Year's Eve party, which is actually just a party for her and Joe. And he just sort
Mm-hmm.
of rejects her and she gets upset and she cuts her wrists. And then that moment in the bed is just so fragile and delicate. And you really see how much she's hurting inside. And she's like, sort of like clutching him, and she just feels helpless because it's like this opportunity feels like this is her one big shot with Joe. Like, this is how I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna make my big return. She doesn't say comeback, return.
I
And
love that.
yes, and it's like when that comes into question, she just sort of lashes out, and that's all she really knows how to do. And it's just really it really affects you. At least it affects me to see this person who desperately needs help and like companionship, and is sort of like, again, doesn't really have the right people around her to help her. As much as the butler might think that he's her person,
But Butler
he's
slash yeah.
right, exactly, yes. But she does get some fun moments of, again, the physical comedy, like when she decides to put on a show for Joe and she's like spinning the umbrella and pretending to be like an ingenue and dressing up like the tramp from the Charlie Chaplin.
Talk about
Just,
a gentle, light, wonderful moment.
yeah, I love that. And again, just really good eye acting, I would say, which is true for the entire film for her, honestly. But she just has, there's just something special there, like an X factor, that she has a presence that I think very few people really had or have. So
She has the best eye acting of the nominees, I think.
easily, even and that's saying something when you have Bette Davis in your lineup here.
Exactly. It's not it's not called Gloria Swanson eyes.
Right, exactly. Should be. Um, yes. So then, of course, we have the big moment where she goes to Paramount. She's meeting with Cecil B. DeMille, her old director. Turns out the only reason that she's been invited is just so they can get her car, which just feels
Oh,
like really like a dagger. And everyone's just kind of humoring her, basically. It sort of is like that sympathetic lie sort of thing you were talking about, but it feels like icky because there's ulterior motives there.
yeah. And we also have to point out that on top of being a meta film, there are real people playing themselves in
Yeah.
this,
Yep.
like Cecily DeMille, like Buster Keaton. I mean, it's a very, again, fact and fiction starts collapsing in on itself,
Right.
which for a viewer is a wonderful thing. When you are
Mm-hmm.
blurring those, it just makes it a lot more entertaining.
Yeah. For us, yes. And I do wonder
Yes.
if maybe people in the industry didn't quite find it as entertaining so much as like, how dare you?
Hmm.
Billy Wilder, how dare you? Um, yeah. And even maybe a little bit of Gloria Swanson, like, what are you doing here? Like, this feels like a little too close for comfort for certain people. So
Yes.
yeah, perhaps more on why she lost later.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe if that had a factor. But I mean, of course, we can just talk about the ending once again. It's just one of the best endings in film history. No exaggeration there. I
Nope.
remember talking about it like at length in the best picture series. But it's like after she's killed Joe and she's being investigated and she refuses to come downstairs, and they sort of pretend to be like a camera crew to sort of lure her downstairs to talk about her, about the case and everything. And she talks about how no one ever leaves a star, which is another
Mm.
impactful moment.
Yeah.
And just, saying she's the greatest star of them all. And that whole tracking shot of her going down the stairs and everyone else looks kind of like frozen, but it's just her very elegantly sort of taking her time, just soaking in this moment. It gives me chills every time I watch this film.
Mm.
And then, of course, we have the incredible ending lines, not just about, ready for her close-up, but I find the moment where she talks about all of you people out in the dark and looks straight into the camera when she does that, that will be like lodged in my brain forever. That moment, because I remember even just whenever I watched this for the first time, seeing that moment, I was like, whoa, wow, like you do not expect like that kind of immediacy in a movie from 1950, so that's another aspect that feels very ahead of its time. And the way she just slinks to the camera is
the
hand
handography.
acting. Yes, handography.
I mean, yes, it's
yeah.
I did find, I didn't realize this before until looking into some bits of trivia and whatnot, that Swanson's daughter said that she kind of never broke character on set. Take that, Daniel Day-Lewis. I I have to wonder if there, I mean, if that's true, if there was a certain amount of self-preservation in doing that, so that she didn't have to self-reflect as she was doing this, and maybe get halfway through and be like, oh my god, I've made a huge mistake, what am I doing, I'm going to be mocked, I'm going to be ridiculed, this isn't a comeback, this is like the worst.
Yeah.
So I wonder if she kept in her Norma Desmond mode just to power through it.
Yeah, I could see it. Self-preservation. Yeah, it's one of these performances for me where it's just so magnetic from the beginning that you can't look away from it, even if you want to, even if you're horrified by it. Like if you're someone in 1950 and you're like, again, too close for comfort, this is making me like, is this my future? Sort of thing.
That's why she's staring at the camera. She doesn't want you to look away. Exactly. She wants you to feel bad.
Yeah. And she does. She really does. And if there's a better sort of ending final note for a performance that I'm ever going to talk about on this Best Actor series, I can't really find one. So
no,
it's such a definitive final note that it's just iconic for a reason.
So. It is, and to your point, what she was able to do or not do after this really kind of speaks to that.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these actresses, the ones that continued through and had a long life, went to television and they did Hotel and Love Boat and all of that. Like, here's your old stars from the 30s, folks.
Yep.
A lot of that in this group.
Mm-hmm. True. For better or for worse. Yes.
For better or for worse.
Gloria Swanson, you will always be a star. You will always be famous, as the kids say.
Yes. Yes.
Shall we move on to our winner?
Let's do it.
Judy Holliday, born yesterday. Oh boy. All right. So again, this is one of those performances where I feel like controversial winner, some say underrated winner. I feel like most people who follow Oscars have some sort of take on Judy Holliday here and her winning over this competition. This is her first and only nomination and obviously win. She didn't have that much of a film career, but she started out in this nightclub act and she was like part of the ensemble there, and she didn't really care for it, but she eventually went to Broadway, and then of course she was in a Broadway play, Born Yesterday, and she was the last minute replacement, I guess, for Jean Arthur, my beloved Jean Arthur, who dropped out for mysterious circumstances, as she is wont to do. But she was a big hit, and there was hope to sort of turn it into a film version, but then Hollywood people were like, who is Judy Holliday? We want a star. And apparently there was like this big conspiracy with Garson Kanin and George Cukor and Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn to like convince the studio to have Judy reprising her role here. And so they gave her sort of like a test run with Adam's Rib. She was a big standout. She got a Golden Globe nomination for it. And that's what sort of helped convince them to have her in this film version. So she's playing Billy Dawn, who is a kind of crass, uneducated young woman and the girlfriend of a very brash tycoon who's hoping to use his influence in Washington, D.C. So they move there together, and he's making her sign all these documents to sort of put his assets in her name to protect, like, against the government. And meanwhile, he's kind of embarrassed by her lack of education and decides to have this local reporter, William Holden, in glasses this time, giving her an education. So that's sort of what the film is. She falls in love with him. He falls in love with her. She gets an education, and they scheme to run away together. So let's talk about it. Yeah, exactly. Judy Holliday, our Best Actress winner over all of those heavyweight performances that we just talked about. What is your take on our winner here?
I love that, again, we are talking about a film, a background, a story that mirrors what it's playing. You know, Billy as a character, also a chorus girl and wanting to do more. So it makes perfect sense. It's always funny to me hearing stories, whether it's now or whether it's then, that Hollywood or a director doesn't want to cast a newcomer. They want to cast a star. And it's like, how do you think stars are made? You have to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. And when you are the director or the studio that has made that choice and created that star, that becomes part of your legacy. And it's always so funny to hear these Hollywood stories of that. It's like, this is what you do. This is your whole purpose of existing.
Yep.
I do think it is such a fascinating backstory of this, with her doing years of performances on stage. And this, again, was the era where stage to screen was happening very quickly and very often with the same actor, actress, mostly actress. I'm just going to stick with actresses because I don't really care about actors.
Yeah.
So it was happening a lot. So it seemed natural that she would do it. And I want to give a shout out to Fritz, who was on the show last on the 49 show, for his video on this and a little bit of the backstory of Katharine Hepburn, really like saying you need to have her in your film, and just going on and on about how great she is in Adam's Rib, which she is. And it was an audition of being able to do this. But this is such a phenomenal movie, and again, one that I had not seen in so long. So I'm so grateful to be on this episode to have rewatched it, because, you know, I mean, it largely sticks to just a few set pieces, but there are these long takes which really are so suited for somebody from the theater, where there are no cuts. And she is, I'm almost just kind of just bubbly and giggly with how phenomenal she is. I think she said once that you have to be really smart to play Dom. And that has been spoken, respoken over the decades when any type of blonde bombshell stuff and all of that. And Marilyn Monroe got that all the time as well.
Right.
And it's absolutely true, because you have to be in on the joke and not be the joke. And she was so smart. Her line delivery so fast, but never at the sake of anybody else. I'll let it go just for now, because I'm going to keep talking about it. But
Sure. Yeah.
This is like an all-timer comedic performance, and not to say comedic as lesser than, but it is it is monumental.
Yes, and I would also argue influential.
Extremely influential.
Yes. Yeah, I think what's so striking about this performance, once again, is that this is quite different from everything else here, but no less great. I think she has the exact right approach to this character, which is to make the audience underestimate her completely at the beginning, but still have enough of that sort of like, body sort of charm to her to make you sort of interested in what she's doing. Like, you just want to follow her whenever she's on screen. I don't really care about what the other characters are even doing here. And that we sort of have these moments that are sprinkled throughout the film where she has to sort of open up and deliver a more dramatic type of scene, and she just totally nails it. This is another sort of broad, big performance that we're talking about here, and maybe some people might call it dated just because of the bigness of it and the voice. People have certain feelings on it, but for me, it's like when she's having those like quieter moments, even like when she's outside and she's like talking about her childhood and her father and everything, it's so natural and charming and winning. And it's like this sort of fascinating blend of like the old, like vaudeville almost style performance with this newer style where it's like she's going for the big reactions and it feels like maybe what she's done on the stage. But she also has like these little asides and sort of like tossing off certain lines that just work so well for film, But yeah, I do think part of why some people might dismiss the performance is just the voice, like I said. And I think it's just one of those things where you're either on board with it, what she's doing here, or you're just not. And you're just like irritated for the whole movie. And like I was sort of saying, way down the line, we had performances like Marissa Tomei and My Cousin Vinny. Or
I have that written down and thinking about all of this. Yeah. Yes.
Or even something like Mira Sorvino in Mighty Aphrodite, that part of the performance is the voice that she's doing. And I feel like
100%.
those performances had similar kinds of criticisms where people just couldn't get past the voice or the broadness of it. But for me, it's like just her first moment of him like yelling from across the way. And she just goes, "What? What?"
It's
in
like
the most like Gilbert Gottfried before his time type of delivery.
It's like the counter of Eleanor Parker in Caged waiting 5 minutes before she speaks. There is a lot of time before we hear Judy Holliday, and our first thing is that and you're right. You're either 100% on board or you're not in that moment.
Or you're like, oh no. Yeah.
Because it is so goddamn funny. It's so funny.
Right. Because there's a certain kind of like elegance to her character as she's introduced, and she's styled so fabulously. Like, she has some incredible outfits in this film, by the way. But just from the beginning, it's like, we expect a certain thing from this character, and then she just opens her mouth and you're just not expecting that. So yeah,
and like you said, extremely influential, whether it is Marissa Tomei or Mira Sorvino, Oscar winners in their own right, for comedic girlfriend / gun mole sort of performances. Oscars really like that. They really like it.
But they also really like it in supporting, which is what makes this performance winning lead actually quite unique.
extremely unique and
Yeah.
exceptional. I mean, I was going down the list of trying to find comparable comedic wins that
Yeah.
aren't like strictly romantic comedy, like,
Right.
Sharon Moonstruck or something like that.
Right.
And she really stands
She does.
above and on her own with this performance, with this win. But I'm with you that her gentle moments, her quiet moments are super important, and that's why being in Adam's rib was so crucial to this,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a dramatic performance.
Yeah.
And her voice is more measured as a result, and she has all of those degrees in her.
Right.
So she plays exactly what she needs to play for the moment that she's in.
Yeah.
I don't think I was more giggly watching this when she's taking the radio from room to room and just kind of bouncing around and singing along on it, trying to sort of divert attention, be the center of attention, but also kind of get the stodginess of the meeting to a more fun place
Yeah.
too. I felt that personally.
Have you been
I,
there?
I kind of feel like I've been there. I'm like, this
Hmm.
party sucks. Let's do something stupid.
Let's take
And
out your gigantic boom box. Bring it from room to
exactly.
room. Yeah.
And it's just it might be, and that is one of those long takes that she's
It is.
doing when the congressman and his wife are there, and she just looks like Marjorie Main and has all of the sense of humor that of a haystack. And it might be the most fun I had in the rewatch, is that little bup, 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 bup. Oh my god, love it. I would give her the win just for that.
Yeah. I love all the moments when she's singing or like hum singing like to this. I mean, it's like instrumental, like almost big band style music. But she's like this like one woman band basically. Like the part where she's playing gin rummy with Harry, her boyfriend, and she's just totally smoking him and she's just like singing along is hysterical. Like
But
every time she does those low notes, I am like fully deceased.
she's absolutely doing that to frustrate him and screw him up, though, and it
Yeah.
works every time. And
Yeah.
I love that there's some real life element to that story too, of playing gin rummy with Broderick Crawford.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's why she's smart. That's why her character is smart. The whole concept of the story is that she's dumb and she needs to be smarter
Right.
and learn the Constitution. And I mean, yeah, and she does, and
Mm-hmm.
uses it brilliantly in the final line of the film. But she was never dumb.
Right.
She was just a different kind of smart.
Exactly. And part of why she makes that journey feel natural is that she was always smart, like you said, in just a different kind of way of expressing it, perhaps. Obviously we have the way that he treats her, which is so horrible and kind of brutal to watch, definitely helps you to have sympathy for the character. But I feel like she never really overplays that aspect of it. Like she doesn't become like meek or like helpless or anything with, when these horrible things are happening to her. And she just gives it right back to him, especially when she's like gaining more confidence towards the end and she's like calling him antisocial and everything. But like even towards the beginning, like she has like that confidence to her. And so when she does transform into that more educated person who's like, taking charge of her life, it doesn't feel all that jarring, I would say. She's not like fundamentally changed as a person, which I
Yeah.
think is more realistic than what we get sometimes with these kind of like Pygmalion kinds of stories, like My Fair Lady, like, educating
Yes.
Rita. Like,
Yeah.
to me, how I read this is that William Holden's character is sort of giving her the resources to sort of be her full self, more so than him just like giving her all this information. Like she just hasn't really unlocked that part of herself yet, if that makes sense.
It does, because what Harry Brock is trying to do in reforming her is not for her, it's for himself so that he looks better. And
Right.
he is a slob of a human and uncouth as hell.
Totally.
So, asking other people to do the thing that you're not willing to do yourself is as like grossly selfishly motivated as it gets.
Right.
And for Holden, yeah, he's just there as the vehicle to kind of help get her there. He's not trying to do anything really for that much self benefit, other than getting the girl. But
Well, yeah.
that happens as a result and not, as the purpose.
It's not the inciting incident. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Screenwriting 101.
Yes.
Yep.
She just has so many great moments, line deliveries. Like, we could just list them all, really. Like, just the moment where she says she's never voted because, like, she wouldn't know who to pick.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Too real. Too real. It's like, come
absolutely, absolutely. Or like when they're talking about his column in the paper, and it mentions Democratic in the headline, and he's like, Democratic, you know what that means? And she's like, not Republican.
Not a
Yeah.
Republican.
Right. And she's like, yeah, that's what it means. Just like that sort of lackadaisical sort of confidence she has is just really charming.
I'm obsessed with
Yeah.
any drop dead. I'm sorry for doing these horrible impersonations, but I can't help it. That's like part of it, and she's amazing.
Yes. The part where they're arguing and he says, you ain't going to be telling anybody, nobody, nothing pretty soon. And she's like, double negative. And she's so proud of herself.
It's such a triumphant moment.
Yeah.
Yes, double negative, right?
Yeah.
And she gets the validation in that moment from Paul that she would never be able to get from Harry.
Right.
And it's, it might be that like turning point moment, that light bulb moment where she just is like, okay, because then, what happens later that incites her to leave Harry is so vicious. That smack is so violent.
Yeah. And
although, his behavior to her was already so ugly and aggressive and dominating, it's such a final moment. And one of the great things is that although we know that where we're going in the story, it only takes that one time, unless we're assuming that it happened before. It only takes that one time. And she's like, I am out. I am done. And there is no like, hopefully he'll reform or maybe he won't do it again, which we see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in stories where husbands or boyfriends hit their wives or girlfriends. And that felt so unique.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. She's done. She is one and done. And I just have so much respect for that as a piece of the narrative. Because she's signing all the document stuff. It's again, a long take and a long scene from that to her leaving. And you're in that moment. You don't really break away from it. And it's a shocking moment for a movie that's been pretty high comedy and broad comedy to that point.
Yeah. And I give credit again to the film for big, this is 1950. The gender politics in movies and especially television is kind of like messy around this time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of do give credit for giving us this moment for her. Like you're saying, it's not like she's like, oh, maybe he'll change. It's like, nope. And it's like this kind of almost this inspirational character at the end of the day. And then you compare that to the rest of this lineup and it's not so much. So yeah, this is a phenomenal performance. I mean, yeah, people are way too dismissive of this performance. And it's kind of frustrating to me when we sometimes talk about how comedic performances are undervalued by Oscars. And then when they do get rewarded, these are the ones that are the most criticized.
Exactly. It's like, oh, but not this time.
Right.
Like, come on.
They're like, oh,
I
but
would
not this one.
exactly. I would
Right.
encourage anybody that is listening that maybe feels like that, and I understand that feeling,
Yep.
is that you go through all of these movies again now, like we just did, because I know both of us have looked at these movies differently in this round or for the first time than we did before. And
Yeah, definitely.
I think you can find a newfound respect and appreciation for it. And I hope anybody rewatching Born Yesterday does, because it's a phenomenal performance and a funny movie, and
Super funny, super
influential.
Yep. Yep.
Not that I need to mention Madonna again,
Oh my
but
Lord.
you know, there's quite a bit of this in between Who's That Girl and Dick Tracy. There's quite a bit here.
We do know she is a student of film history, so.
Yes, she is, and you know I was not going to let this podcast escape without mentioning Madonna one more time. So
thank you very much.
I'll ask forgiveness after it's done.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's just talk about here why Judy Holliday is our big winner. So I was just reading from Inside Oscar. I guess Harry Cohn sent out a bunch of ads just praising Judy's performance and sort of comparing her to other people who had like big breakout performances, like Vivien Leigh in Gone with the Wind, Bette Davis in Of Human Bondage, like these moments where it's like, oh my God, a star is born, like comparing it to that and like sort of running with that narrative. So that's what was going on there. And then meanwhile, we definitely had a lot of stuff for Gloria Swanson, not so much with the rest of the lineup, but it sort of felt like those were the two that felt like they had the most amount of ad campaigning to it, because they were the juiciest narratives. Like we have The Star is Born and we have The Comeback.
Yeah.
So it's sort of maybe between those two. Whether that's reflected in the final vote, we can talk about later. But I don't know. Why do you think ultimately Judy succeeded here? The big question.
Oh my God. Like I said at the beginning, obviously I am not a proponent of vote splitting in this traditional sense that people use it in.
Right.
I think the weirdly closest I might be able to associate it with, though, and what some people also call vote splitting, which I do not think it is that you're looking at these two titans as who the battle is between.
Right.
You're looking at Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson. So almost anybody else is not really kind of in the view. Everyone else is either, is third place. And then it sort of reminded me of Jack Nicholson and Daniel Day-Lewis, and then Adrian Brody winning, where the others had won the precursors and the attention was there, and it was, previous winners, and just all the attention was there.
Right.
And I think that's how these quote unquote surprise wins happen, because you're not looking at the thing that people are voting for. So that is not vote splitting to me. That is the viewer thinking that the race is between two people and a third person wins. That is not the same thing at all. I think clearly Holliday had really strong internal backing. And I'm imagining Katharine Hepburn, the most famous non-Oscar showing recluse, calling people and writing letters and doing all of the behind the scenes campaign, because she talked about Judy Holliday in her interviews in the 80s, and I mean she was always on her mind. So I feel like she puppet mastered quite a bit of this campaign, and in the best way possible. On the other side of looking at Davis and Swanson and the similarities in their stories and roles, I get that. I totally get that. Although they are completely different performances, completely different films with totally different perspectives. It's just not really the same thing. But I think sort of to a point you were alluding to earlier, both Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve got the most nominations, like 11 and 14 each.
Yeah.
So all of the respect was there. Everything was there. But when it came down to it, it might have been a little too real. And that might have been enough to keep people from pulling the lever on either of them. Which gave that open door to Judy Holliday and to, like we said, comedic performances that just do not get the attention. Again, if it's not a romantic comedy, you don't get that. You can,
right.
Claudette Colbert and Audrey Hepburn, those were still romantic comedies. Mm-hmm. But there hadn't really, by my estimation, been a performance like this winning Best Actress. So it was also something that the Oscars love to do, and they like to anoint stars as well, new stars.
Especially in this category.
They love doing that.
Mm-hmm.
She's also young. Yeah. She was 29 playing 29. I think she was the only person playing her age, like almost. And there is an appeal to Academy voters in doing that, of saying, here is what we want right now in this moment. And it is Judy Holliday in a comedic performance.
Absolutely. I think it also, like, just from reading Inside Oscar, even Bette Davis, when she learned that Judy Holliday won, said that she was happy, and she said she was glad that a newcomer had won. And I felt like that was rather pointed, perhaps, to some of her competition, or to herself, maybe. Mm-hmm. But I think that's definitely a sentiment that quite a few Academy voters might share to a certain extent. And it was especially truer back in the day, I would say. It would be a while until we got a 3-time Best Actress winner, Katharine Hepburn, as previously mentioned. And so I feel like, yeah, they were in the mood to give that coronation moment to a new person who came out of nowhere for most people. I'm sure people had certain feelings on Bette Davis or Gloria Swanson just from being in the industry for years and years. And maybe they felt Eleanor Parker, not yet, quote unquote, even though there was never a time when they actually did reward her. But like, it's sort of like, hey, that's interesting. Maybe it's not a winning role necessarily, but good for you. And Anne Baxter, they already rewarded her in supporting. So I felt like Bette Davis just overshadows her in that film. Mm-hmm. I think the two of them were definitely bridesmaids here, not really quite in the winning conversation. So yeah, when it came down to it, it was a 3-horse race, and they went with the one that felt like the present / future, which that's what Hollywood is invested in. They don't want to be reminded of what the past was or what they might become in the case of like a Gloria Swanson. I mean, just from reading the casting of Sunset Boulevard and from people watching the film, a lot of actresses were not on board with this material at all. Like, they were not comfortable with this.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was at least partly why Gloria Swanson lost, is that it was just too, not that they felt that, I don't know if they actively felt it was too close for comfort, but it was just like, this is really seedy kind of material. Like, we don't even want to touch this. It's like when Academy people don't like horror movies almost. It's like, I don't know how I feel about this kind of material. Whereas Born Yesterday, even if it's like not necessarily a kind of film or role that has been rewarded in Best Actress before, it's much more familiar for a lot of voters, this kind of film. So
I would be really curious because we're talking about 1950, which is just before BAFTA had Best Actress. They didn't start till like 2 years later. How that would shake out. I have to imagine it would be, all things being equal, we would probably have seen Davis win or Swanson. And same with the Tony Awards. I think they didn't have nominees for the first couple of years. It was just winners. And so I wonder if there would be, if Judy Holliday had gotten into the Tonys, say they were, years earlier. If that would be a factor, we certainly would be using it, in
Yeah.
what we do now. We would be
Yep.
pointing to BAFTA, we'd be pointing to the Tonys, because there aren't a whole lot of precursors really at this point.
Right.
And we would use that to bolster our arguments, either way. But without those at our disposal, we have to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, which is what makes these earlier years so fun to talk about, because we can really get to some more concrete and more deeper reasoning than just saying like, oh, she swept all the precursors, so that's why she won, which is probably like the conversation we'll be having down the line, which is fine, but it's just a different animal at this time. So yeah, so there you go. We have a lot of questions to get to, so let's just speed through them real quick.
Oh my God.
Here's from Fritz, our friend Fritz. Is your guest aware of how big the honor is to discuss this year? I don't know, Eric, are you?
I am, because I have already mentioned how intimidated I was before we started. I mean, I was already, and then I saw Fritz come, and I was like, oh my God. Because he was just on. And
Sure.
Oh, I hope he doesn't feel like I took this episode away from him or something. I don't know. I'm very intimidated, Fritz. Yes, thank you, though.
Well, I think you've done a great job so far. Eric Maxwell Brunn says, is this a top 5 all-time Best Actress lineup? Do you think there's a case that this is the Best Actress lineup?
For me, yes.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yes and yes, it's the best ever.
I think it's impeccable. I think it is absolutely unimpeachable. I think Best Actress is generally better than Best Actor in terms of being able to kind of go, these are 5 good, versus like maybe there's 3, maybe there's 2.
That's certainly true.
I think the 2000s had some pretty amazing lineups. Not the least of which is the shirt I'm wearing right now, which is 2002. Kidman, Zellweger, all of that. Yeah. It got a lot better. But yeah, for 1950, for these performances and these films, yeah, this is all-timer.
Yeah, easily top 5 for me, I would say. I think all 5 of them deliver the kind of performances that would maybe be winning for me if they weren't competing against each other. So yeah, I'm going to refrain from saying this is the best, because I still haven't seen like every single Best Actress nominee yet. There's still some holes in my viewing, but yeah, definitely towards the top for me as of now. I would also call out 2006 as primo lineup. Very excited to get to that one down the line.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, the 2000s are just a really good decade for
surprisingly good
Best Actress.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. Back to Fritz. Why do people constantly say this was an upset? I think because the gays love theater queens, right?
Yeah.
We love a diva.
we definitely do, and that's a question that is sort of, is it being asked from a 2022 perspective? Is it being asked from a 1951 perspective? Because I do think that it was a surprise then. I think people were having that same thought, that it was between Swanson and Davis, and then it happened. And honestly, Broderick Crawford being the Best Actor or Announcer for it is so wonderful and amazing. I wish Holliday had been there. That would have been so beautiful and wonderful. But yeah, I think because of the legacies of All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard lasting 70 plus years, there's always going to be a perception that it was a surprise, that one of them was robbed. I don't think that will ever change, honestly. And you know what? It doesn't actually have to, because it doesn't change the fact that Holliday won, and it doesn't change the legacy of Born Yesterday being a great comedic film.
There you go. You kind of already answered this from Sundays with Kate, our friend Murtada El Fadl.
Hey.
Judy Holliday winning is an atypical win, or is it? Can you think of other Best Actress winners who won with a breakout comedic role? Pretty atypical. Yeah.
It is when you're not attaching a romantic comedy to it, it's absolutely unique. We've had lots of, debuts and young actresses win, but it's not like this.
Right.
This isn't, Julie Andrews and Mary Poppins. It's not Barbara Streisand and Funny Girl. It's not Jennifer Lawrence in Silver Linings Playbook.
Audrey Hepburn and Robin Holliday even.
Yeah, all of those have the same connection of sort of feeling like here's the star that we want to anoint. There's definitely that with all of those types of wins, but not just a true blue comedic performance.
Right.
Because the romantic part of this with William Holden is so secondary. It's not the focus at all.
I love that. Yeah. And again, this kind of performance feels like is just reserved for supporting now.
Mm-hmm.
So, Owen Daly said, are all these performances the actor's best, or would you rank any other turn they've given above their nominations?
I went through all of the questions in the thread, but this was a little more work than I was like ready to do.
Yeah, that's fair.
Analyze all 5 of the full careers and say this is the best performance.
I mean, Judy probably yes, right?
But when you break it down, Judy,
Gloria
yes.
Swanson probably
Gloria
yes.
Swanson, yes.
Eleanor Parker, I'm not really sure yet. So
I'm not sure about Eleanor Parker and Bette
Anne Baxter,
Davis,
I guess.
Yeah, I think Anne Baxter probably yes. It
not
almost
for
feels
me
like
for
default.
Bette Davis.
Yeah, it almost feels like default. But Bette Davis. Yeah, I mean, she has 6 decades of performances, and her early work is exceptional. I don't know. I might be a little bit on the fence because I do so attach my personality to Margot Channing. So sure. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, that's fair. And I attach my personality to Eve Harrington. How about that?
Kevin, are you replacing me? What's going on?
Let's move on. Another one from Owen Daly. If Anne Baxter was in a remake as Margot, who could play Anne in 1965? I think that's who could play Eve in 1965 when she was Betty's age. A fun question. So the idea is Anne Baxter is playing Margot Channing now, who plays Eve. I went with Natalie Wood here. That could be fun.
That.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Julie Andrews because I wonder if she could have some darkness to her.
Well, I would love that.
Because I think maybe I wanted it more than like maybe this is realistic, but I love Natalie Wood because she can overact a lot, and
exactly.
She can. I think she could get
inside. Daisy Clover says hi.
Yes, it does. Rebel Without a Cause says hi.
Well, maybe, yeah. Christoph says Judy Holliday's performance should be cherished as one of the best winning performances in Best Actress history, but instead people consider it contentious because of who she beat. Had Davis or Swanson won instead, would that win be regarded as equally contentious today?
Wait, so if I'm understanding, would a win for Swanson or Davis be considered contentious?
Right, exactly.
Yes, it would, but Judy Holliday would not factor in it. It would be, if Davis won, the Swansonites would be out, in full regalia.
Yes.
And if it was the other way around, then it would be, how could Bette Davis lose? That would be till the end of time that conversation would happen, because we are having the conversation now about this. So yeah.
Moral of the story is we would have always found something to complain about.
That is exactly right.
Welcome to following the Oscars. Miles McHale said, do we think Holliday is beneficiary of a spread the love vote? This category reps 3 Best Picture nominees, 2 from the same film. that had some guaranteed wins elsewhere. Since Holliday was the strongest chance for Bourne yesterday, is that why she triumphs, or am I crazy?
Miles, I don't think you're crazy.
I really don't think that Oscar voters are that strategic, to be honest. I've heard people say things like this in the past, and I mean, who knows? Maybe I've done the same thing too when I've been, prognosticating myself. Like, oh, here's the spot they're gonna reward Marriage Story with Laura Dern. This is where they reward Marriage Story, and it's like, I don't know. Is that really how people think? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how we view makeup wins, whether it's Al Pacino, Paul Newman, Brad Pitt, Laura Dern. I think that is how we view them. So we project our feelings onto voters all the time.
Yep.
And essentially tell them how they voted and why they voted. And that it's the arrogance is hilarious because we all do it. And I love it, and it's funny, which is why the Addison DeWitt quote is so goddamn hilarious, and it will be until the end of time, because no, just calm down. You're not influencing anything. You just, if you're not in the room, you're not in the room. Right. Here's what I might point to, and that is that Judy Holliday won the Golden Globe for Comedy Musical, and she was nominated for drama.
I'm glad you noticed that too.
Film.
Yep.
That could never happen now. But don't tell me that is not a microcosm look at how people looked at her performance as a whole, because I think it is.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I think she blends both of them and excels in both. Miles McHale also said, if Betty or Gloria had won here, would they have gone head-to-head with Hepburn as more mature leading ladies in the 50s, 60s? I don't think Betty's career would have changed all that much if she wins this, to be honest. But maybe for Gloria, maybe she would have gotten some more interesting opportunities to do things like that. I don't know.
I feel like Davis would be largely unaffected, and Swanson probably would have had the exact same non-career.
Okay, so nothing would have happened. Great.
I
Let's move on.
I don't think so.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, here we go. Very excited about this question. Sammy Flowers. If you had to recast the 5 performances with current day actresses, who would you choose? I do have a list.
Oh, so do I.
Oh boy. Let's go one by one, recasting these roles.
Okay.
All right. Who do we have for the character of Eve in All About Eve?
Well, I mean, my Margot and Eve are like kind of together.
Connected?
They're
well,
absolutely...
they'll do the package deal. Who do you have for Eve and Margot?
Okay. For Eve, I have Keke Palmer, and for Margot, I have Angela Bassett.
Oh, wow. Okay. I love that. Why aren't we greenlighting that right now?
The way that Angela Bassett could nail Margot Channing
absolutely
would be obscene.
That should happen.
I want it now.
Why would you give that to me if I can't have it?
I know.
Okay, well, here's what I went with. I started with a little bit of resemblance for Eve. And so, therefore, I went with Florence Pugh.
Oh, my God.
Who I definitely think, as you mentioned, the deep voice, 100%. Could absolutely do, like, the humble to calculated arc. She would have murdered it.
Yes.
She could murder it, I should say. And here's one I'm very excited about for Margot. Because I think she would be totally perfection for this particular performance at this point in her career. Kate Winslet.
Oh my goodness. There are so many reasons why that would be so good.
Yes.
And it's funny because I wrote all this down, but I didn't mention how much of this year is sort of revolving around women's thirst for awards and success and fame that men never have stories like this attached to. It's not like this. It's almost like it's a totally unique thing for a woman to want awards.
Imagine that.
And in my parenthetical, I have, Joan Crawford, Kate Winslet, Anne Hathaway, and how they have been treated, perceived for their thirst versus other people. So Winslet is such an inspired choice.
She would murder that role. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the character of Marie in Caged. This is the one I sort of struggled with the most because there wasn't one that stood out for me in particular, but what do you have?
I have Sydney Sweeney.
Oh boy. Okay. I like that.
And that second season of Euphoria just brought her to some such dark places. And she, in her arc on that show, goes from, a relatively innocent, girly girl to just down in the gutter.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would like to see her on a platform like that. I think she could do really well.
Also age appropriate. So good job on that. I settled on, speaking of TV, kind of, Julia Garner, our fave.
Interesting.
Yes. Because I feel like, she certainly has like the tough edge, which will make it easy for her in like the later part of that performance. But I think she could pull off some of the innocence, maybe, towards the beginning. I don't know, just a thought.
Mm-hmm. I like
Let's do it. Norma Desmond, Sunset Boulevard.
Don't
be mean.
I'm not. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names that I was kind of toying with.
Okay.
And then I decided to land. Well, I'll tell you some of the ones that I was thinking about. Because Norma Desmond is only 50 in this goddamn story, I was thinking of like Alicia Silverstone, Winona Ryder, Callista Flockhart.
Oh boy, okay.
But ultimately, I landed on Gillian Anderson.
Interesting. Wow. Because I like it.
I feel like there would be a lot of echoes of Gloria Swanson's performance.
Yeah.
Certainly that, like, am I British? Am I American with, accent code switching?
Yeah.
But I mean, also because Anderson is just such a phenomenal actress.
Powerhouse.
I kind of want to see that.
I do too. And what's funny is that she did also do an adaptation of All About Eve.
Holy crap. That's right.
On the stage.
That's right. Oh my gosh.
So that's very funny. I think she could have done either one.
Yeah. I totally forgot about that.
Well, obviously Glenn Close. But
yeah, I mean, that was she was on my list, but I didn't want to say that.
But if it's just like a straight adaptation and not like the musical route, I was thinking maybe Cate Blanchett.
Wow.
Possibly.
Wow.
I think she has the face for it. I think she's the right age for it. She has the theatricality.
It was funny because I was trying to think of, going along the lines of why Swanson was cast and why it's
that's fair.
Art imitating life. And there are so many 80s and 90s actresses that are enjoying some good comebacks right now that it made it difficult because only because I was sort of narrowing my choice to something like that. I mean, Winona Ryder would have been great, but now she has, Stranger Things and she's doing just fine.
Yeah. But I'd like to see her version of Norma. I bet that would be interesting.
I would love it because I would want it to be sort of like her character in Black Swan. I want the R-rated version of Sunset Boulevard, and that's how I want her to play it.
Oh boy. Yeah. I just thought of Uma Thurman too, but then I'm like, she basically already did that with Poison Ivy, so I don't know if that's redundant.
Yes. Oh my God, Poison Ivy.
All right, let's finish this out here. Who do we have as Billy Dawn in Born Yesterday?
This was by far the hardest. And I have 3 names, and they could not be any more different. And I don't know why any would be like better or worse than the other. It's
okay.
So one is actually someone you mentioned before, and I thought Julia Garner might be able to do something really fun with this. I definitely need to see her stretch some comedic muscles a little bit more.
Yeah,
But I think she's I mean, inventing Anna shows that she understands what camp is at least. So
exactly.
there's that.
And she can be
Um,
quite crass.
yes, yeah.
Ozark. Yeah.
I think she would be able to nail a voice if that was how
Oh
it was
yeah.
going to be done.
Totally.
Um, I thought Dove Cameron might,
Wow. I like
but
that.
that was like
Okay.
totally out of nowhere. I mean, not nowhere,
Okay.
but like out of left field. And then Selena Gomez,
Ooh.
because
Wow.
she has the bap comedic timing that is very much on display in Only Murders in the Building.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like she would be able to own that pretty well. But
That'd
that
be
would be
interesting.
it really would be.
A
She's
different
got a
interpretation, but I could see it. Yeah.
very different, especially with what her voice is like.
Yes. Right. Well, this is the one that I was the most excited about sharing with the class. Here is my 2022 version of Born Yesterday. Cardi B.
Oh my God. Wow. I can absolutely say I did not see that coming.
Well, I was thinking about the influence of this character, and I thought about Fran Drescher in The Nanny, which naturally led me to what a lot of people say would be a good reboot of The Nanny with Cardi B. And here we are. I think it would be incredible.
I love that, like, instead of her first word being what, it would be oh grrr, like through the window. And we'd be off and running.
Yeah. And I also thought of like she has like a connection to politics. Like she's good friends with Bernie Sanders. Like just saying. I feel like it connects.
Oh my goodness.
I think we should make this happen.
I am so intrigued. I'm gagged by this.
She knows how to do a voice.
Yes, she
So,
does. Yes, she does. Oh, I'm into it.
I think it's time for her Star is Born moment. So there you have it. If you have any other suggestions, feel free to at us or to blast our choices.
I think we'll get all of the above, but I want it. I want
Yes.
everyone's thoughts on that.
All right. César Award winner Baby Annette says, will we ever see our beloved Glenn do Norma on the big screen to please us people in the dark? And if she finally does, do you think she can do what Gloria couldn't and win an Oscar? Don't do this to me. This is not fair.
You could have just not asked it.
Why don't you answer?
Oh my God. Oh, great.
Is it happening? Are you going to break my heart? Are you going to break Glenn's heart?
She keeps saying that it is, but oh.
If I have to read one more quote where she's like, believe it or not, we're getting closer.
I know. Let's say that yes, it's happening. Let's just pretend that is absolutely happening. They're shooting, this and next year, and it's going to come out the year after everything's done. Let's just go to if we think she's winning or not, because I think that's what everybody really wants to know and really cares about. This is almost like I don't want to say a no-win situation, but it kind of is, at least for voters. They're just going to feel like they're being compelled. I think they probably felt like that for 2018 and said no. I don't want to put her through that again. I mean, she's always put on a brave face of a good sense of humor about it, but yeah, I mean, I don't care how great you feel about yourself. It can't feel very good.
Nope.
It can't, and I just don't want her to go through that, honestly. I just don't. I would love for her to win, but every year is totally its own year. So to say, can she win, makes absolutely no sense right now, because we don't even have a clue what the landscape would be.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And, it's not that common for actresses to get the makeup wins. You know, we have Julianne Moore,
Yeah,
but we have more on the men's side than we do on the women's side.
we certainly do.
Yeah.
Funny how that's suddenly started happening. Moving on. Andrew Carden said, of the 5 films with multiple actress noms, only one, Terms of Endearment, emerged triumphant in the category. Do you think vote splitting can be a factor in acting races? And had Baxter been frauded into supporting, would Davis have won? I'm going to say blanket no.
Yeah, I'm going to say blanket no as well.
Yeah. There was a time when I believed that that was the case, that vote splitting was truly a factor in some races. But I just think it's all coincidental. And like you said, it's all its own thing each year. We see people winning over their co-stars in supporting all the time. So
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if lead or supporting has anything to do with it necessarily. I don't know. There's just not a lot of opportunities that we've seen for 2 women competing in lead together from the same film. There's only 5. So
there's only 5, and the last time was 1991. Exactly. And since then, and over in Best Actor, it's even older. It's 1984. You know, was the last time that 2 leads of the same gender were in the same category. So the dynamic just changed and shifted with not just with voters, but with campaigns. It just changed. But, you know, voters have also shown that they'll do whatever the fuck they want and put, you know, Lakeith Stanfield and Danny Kaluuya both in supporting. They'll do what they want when they want to do it. But for the most part, they will go along with the campaigns. So
yeah,
if you're going to fraud somebody into supporting, they're going to go along with it because they would rather see that person nominated than not nominated because they're in the wrong category.
Right. Well, our friend Joey Gentili has something to say.
No.
Bette Davis infamously started the rumor that vote splitting was a cause for her loss, starting a rumor that unfortunately still persists till this day. If vote splitting was real, not a single winner would happen in history. Why won't this false lie die?
That feels more like Joey Gentili started a rumor that Bette Davis started a rumor. So I'm just going to go with that.
The layers.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, generally speaking, about people using vote splitting as a reason for something is that it's an easy thing to use when a vote type of situation seems unreasonable, perhaps, or you can't provide reason to things or order to things. People look for patterns, and that happens to be something that people have latched onto. I don't know. That's
vote splitting is the QAnon conspiracy of the Oscar world.
Wow.
And there we go.
Here, folks.
Yep. That's yeah.
Our friend Sophia Simonello says, if you could see the votes for any Best Actress race, would this be the one?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I want to see them all.
Yes.
You know what I would want? I would want to see all of those 5 years to see and validate or invalidate the concept of vote splitting. And
I like that.
Because what if I don't know, what if there was a huge separation between 2 actresses in the same film?
Right. Might have been.
And I am mad.
Might have been right here.
Might have been right here.
Maybe Anne Baxter was 5th. Gasp.
Gasp is right.
I would not choose this one. As much as I would like to say yes, I have to be true to my heart and say I would love to see those totals from 2018.
Oh my God.
I just gotta see the margin. Coleman and close. It's my own baggage, and I have to own that. So
no, I think so too. I think that would be pretty great.
I'd also love to see 1954, just to see how much Judy lost by to Grace.
Oh, and now you're breaking my heart too. Yeah, I mean, this question is all about like heartbreaking losses.
Oh yeah.
More than anything.
Yep. Luke Val said, "Who do you think came in 6th?" No idea.
Oh my
hard
gosh.
to say.
I don't think I had looked at that.
We've got
question.
Ingrid Bergman and Stromboli as a possibility. We have Judy Garland and Summerstock.
Yeah.
These are names that I wrote down. Barbara Stanwyck in The Furies.
Yeah.
Gloria Graham in A Lonely Place.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Betty Hutton, Annie Get Your Gun.
Yeah,
I don't know.
those are the exact same things I have written down too.
Okay, perfect.
Joan Fontaine. I don't know. Joan Crawford. Damn, Don't Cry.
Yeah.
It's.
I feel like these 5 were like rock solid.
The separation between 5 and 6.
Yeah.
A galaxy.
Yeah. A few more questions, real quick. Cinema Sex Kitten said 1950 is the year Cinderella was released. Celebrity voice cast these 5 nominees in the parts of Cindy, Lady T, the 2 stepsisters, and the fairy godmother.
I did not do this question.
Well, I went a different route with this, and I just decided to take these 5 actresses and cast them in Cinderella.
I love it.
Yes. You gotta do Bette Davis as Lady Tremaine. Mm-hmm. That's an obvious for me.
Yep.
We'll have Gloria Swanson as the fabulous fairy godmother.
Work.
Love that. We'll go Eleanor Parker as Cinderella. Sure. And we'll have Judy Holliday and Anne Baxter as the stepsisters.
Unimpeachable. No notes.
No notes.
Yep.
This is one got late from Jin Byrne. I consider Judy Holliday's win over Bette Davis to be the Academy's worst decision of all time within the acting categories. Would you agree? What other major Academy faux pas would you put at the top of your list among actors?
Girl.
I would not agree. Sorry, Jim.
Oh, Jim. Honey. Not when Sandra Bullock is right there. Not when Kate Winslet is right there. Oh, that is... I am gonna bite my tongue right now.
Wow. Okay.
Which is not like me.
I would say the worst decision. Sorry, Fritz. Please don't listen for the next 20 seconds. I think Louise Reiner in The Good Earth was a very big faux pas for many reasons. Not only is she playing a different race, but she's also beat so many great multiple performances from actresses that never won Oscars, like Irene Dunne and Barbara Stanwyck. So I'm still bitter about that. Okay, Fritz, you can put back in your headphones.
That's what
I'll say.
I'll just say yes to that.
Just yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Dennis said, is the general consensus Gloria Swanson came in second? Not necessarily. We'll talk about it in a little bit. And then finally, Maury Ritchie said, who do you think came in second and third in the votes? We will get to that next. So let's just jump into our final segment here. Who do we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race? Hotly contested. Eric, give me your honest opinion here. Who was second?
I think Bette Davis was second, based on what I said a bit ago, that, it led the nominations. It won 6. It won everything around Best Actress. So I have to think that she was second.
Okay. Well, I think it was Gloria Swanson.
Love it.
I think Betty, for the reasons you stated, had a great shot at it, and it's possible that maybe she and Gloria were very close as runners-up. But I do think Gloria had a pretty big comeback narrative that might have helped her. I don't know if there was a whole lot of urgency to get Betty a third Oscar necessarily. Maybe she had the support of critics. She won the New York Film Critics. She won Cannes. There's possibilities there. But I feel like a little bit of the sentiment vote may have been with Gloria more so than Betty. But it could go either way.
She won the Globe.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know.
And she got to towel off a wet, hairy-chested William Holden. And that should have been enough.
Should have been enough. Should have been enough. Well, on that note, who do you think you would have voted for in this particular race, Erik Anderson?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Who's your pick?
I mean, this is coming from just rewatching all of them this week.
Right, that's what this is for.
I've been actually trying not to think about it. I would pick Judy Holliday.
Wow.
Even though I am aligned, like I said, I'm aligned with Margot Channing, and I think this is an insanely perfect Bette Davis performance. I want stuff like this to win Best Actress.
Gotcha.
So that's my choice.
And I respect you for that choice. Sorry, that was not meant to be so sarcastic, but
that sounded like a perfect Margot Channing delivery. I respect you for that choice.
I respect you for that, but I disagree. My vote is 100% for Gloria Swanson. I would have been totally swept up in that comeback narrative. It would have been the Glenn Close of 1950 for me. I'm not even going to beat around the bush about that.
Good.
100% for Gloria.
I love it.
Judy, happy for you.
Oh my God, Kevin.
I'm not totally beat up about it. Like, I think it's a very cool and interesting win. It just wouldn't be my personal pick. But I respect the Academy for feels like going outside the box and going for something they hadn't really done before. So I truly do respect them for this decision.
You know, and I think before this week, I would have said Bette Davis without even blinking an eye.
Wow.
I mean, it wouldn't have been close for me.
Okay. Well, there you have it.
Yeah.
Things change.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I just find it very interesting that you go, like, as you grow older, you go for the more younger, more ingenue kind of performance.
You know, it's weird. I shouldn't. It doesn't. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know what I should or shouldn't.
You don't. There's no should or shouldn't here. You just honor yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Erik, this was fun.
This was
This
epic.
was fun and long and exactly what this year deserves. So thank you for bringing it. Always love having you on the show. Thank you so much.
This, like I said, this is an absolute honor to be on this specific episode. I know how much people are anticipating this year.
Yes.
I mean, your show is hugely popular, as it should be. I told you before how much I love it. It is my absolute favorite Oscar podcast that there is. There just isn't anything better, and just more involved and fun and with the right people and everything. All of it. It's all good.
Thank you, Erik.
Thank you. I love your show.
So kind.
Love your show.
Always
and
so kind.
I'm always absolutely honored to be on it, and I jump at the chance. Are you kidding? It's the best.
Yes. Well, always love having you. Where can people find more of your lovely work, which is apparently inferior to this, on the internet? Jeez. Way to downgrade your own Oscar podcast.
I know. We actually, have rebooted the AwardsWatch podcast to be a weekly now. Thank you, Ryan McQuaid. And we haven't done a whole lot of Oscar stuff yet. We're just doing kind of the weeklies. And as we get closer to the fall festivals and stuff, it'll be pretty intensely Oscar specific stuff.
Oh my.
Obviously this year we're not doing like a lot of like retrospective stuff. I would never want to step on your toes anyway, because it would be inferior.
Oh, please.
So it's, that's why I like guesting on people's stuff. I'm like, you're doing the thing. I'll just be a part of it.
I'll just be me.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
AwardsWatch.com. A great place.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Great place to be.
It's a pretty good place.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, Oscar Runner-Up on Twitter as well. Instagram at And the Runner-Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard and want to hear even more somehow, go to patreon.com/And the Runner-Up is, where you can find a lot of bonus episodes. And next week, we'll be talking about the 1951 Best Actress race. The nominees were Katharine Hepburn for The African Queen, Vivien Leigh for A Streetcar Named Desire, Eleanor Parker back again for Detective Story, Shelley Winters for A Place in the Sun, and Jane Wyman for The Blue Veil, with the winner being Miss Vivien Leigh. So that's what to watch before next episode. Thanks again, Erik.
Thank you, Kevin.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.